Hi, 2002. What a boss of a year. I wouldn't say it was the best in the first decade of Windows gaming, but it was definitely one showing how much the platform progressed from its humble and awkward beginnings. So let's see what games released during the year. While my favorite out of all Port Royale games has got to be the second, and in its gold iteration no less the first that released in 2002, was also a rather great title. It's a real-time management business simulation with some arcade and strategic elements. I know, sounds like an odd mixture, but it's actually well put together, makes complete sense when you play it, and most importantly, is a lot of fun. It is set during the most fun and also most deadly time in the Caribbean, so 16th and 17th century, and gives you a task of becoming a governor. Now, that is the goal, what the game wants you to achieve to see the ending. What you will do with it though is entirely up to you. Because while you can create a trading empire, amass wealth and aim for that elusive target, you can also, funny enough, same as in Sid Meier's Pirates, do other things too. Namely become a privateer hunting pirates and working for the crown, or even arm yourself with a parrot, peg leg and a hook and become a pirate yourself and get rich and famous plundering and raiding, often both at once. You can also mix the three, well, let's call them careers here, and double in all of what they offer to some degree. Possibilities are not endless perhaps, but it's not a game you'll get bored with, and a lot of elements found in the Pirates are present in Port Royale too. So you can advance in the ranks working for your chosen nation, becoming more and more important and well-known, performing deeds for the crown. You can seek treasures big and small, go on story missions and look for your long-lost family members too. The combat is real-time and arcade in its design, making for an action-packed and most importantly, fun clashes on the seas. Your initial ship is rather small and not really a true machine of either trade or destruction, so will neither allow you to become rich fast nor deadly. But whichever the role you pick for yourself, if you persevere, you'll eventually manage to save up for a better one and perhaps even leave your mark on the Caribbean. If you go for the trading, there are quite a few goods, or commodities if you will, to choose from, and the supply and demand system powering it all seems to be rather well implemented and true to life. So buying a lot of stuff somewhere raises its prices, and selling in bulk makes it rather cheap. You can create complicated trade routes between many locations too and manage even up to 100 individual vessels. Seems like a lot, but it can be largely automated, so don't let the number discourage you. If you decide to seek fame and fortune outside of the law, where most fun is actually, you can sink or capture ships, and grabbing and repairing a bigger one may not only save you money, but also grant access to considerably more powerful vessel. Which is always fun if you want to have a fun pirate nickname like Greybeard, Yellowtooth or Stinky Feet and be the scourge of the seas. There are also missions, both story and randomized. First focus mainly on finding your family members, and second on increasing your reputation, seeking treasures or taking part in sea battles. In as open game as Port Royale is, they are a nice change from what you mostly do, and definitely extend the game's longevity. Star Wars Starfighter is one of the many games that LucasArts released around the premiere of The Phantom Menace, one of the most disappointing movies in the entire Star Wars franchise. But unlike the movie, it's actually a rather fun and well put together title. Taking from what they learned with rather brilliant Racer, LucasArts focused on pure action fun rather than trying to build a huge, larger-than-life adventure with well-known characters. And it shows. Because while you're following three rather unknown personas, rookie Naboo fighter pilot Rhys Dallows, female mercenary Vanna Sage and Nim the Pirate, the game never slows down to shower you with minutes worth of cutscenes and puts you right in the middle of the action, fighting against the Trade Federation. You'll tackle them in space and on the ground on different planets within the star system. And if you've ever played and enjoyed X-Wing or TIE Fighter games in the past, you'll find yourself right at home in Starfighter 2. Each of the characters has their own unique craft, and not only they are different looking, but also handling and feeling. While the objectives for each of the 14 missions you'll partake in may seem very samey, and are really only either of go and kill or defend your assets kind, since the game is set during the ignition of the conflict period, you can't really fault it for that, as that's what they would most likely be anyway. All of them though have multiple bonus to the main objectives, and these are quite varied, ranging from tagging of the enemy ships to completing specific, usually deadly tasks in a given time limit. They keep the missions entertaining and are a definite highlight of the game. As the Starfighter starts and you'll be completing your first few missions, it may initially feel a bit disorienting. Because of the whole switching between these three characters back and forth automatically without you knowing why it happens or whatever, but soon enough you'll realize that despite their different backgrounds and allegiances, all three of them are fighting against a common enemy, and that will allow you to focus on action and stop caring for the background of it all. Presentation is of so-called LucasArts quality, so both graphics and sound design are naturally of the highest kind and well polished. Overall, if you enjoy space-themed first-person perspective spaceship shooters, this one's really good and definitely worth your time. If you like cheese, be it on burgers, pizza or wherever else, like on the floor when it falls off your sandwich, then you'll love Freedom Force, as it's as cheesy as they come. It takes jabs at superhero comic books culture wherever it can. They are not mean jabs though, and more like an homage to the classic comics of the Silver Era or delicate pokes of comic book love, however it may sound. I've covered its follow-up in one of my Forgotten Treasures videos, but this is the one that started it all. And let me tell you, it was a bullseye at first try. The story begins with the Energy X canister reaching Earth. Now, it may have looked like a coincidence, accident or something that should have never happened, because what would a random canister do in space, and even more so, one containing such an exotic substance? But in reality it was all deliberate. It was sent here by the aliens known as the Domain, who aimed to grant humans powers, well, at least some of them, so that they would in their infinite greed for it kill each other. So you know, they wanted to cleanse the planet to have it become an easy target for them to grab. Why did they need that Earth? Who knows, maybe they needed it for an interstellar parking, or to open Space Hot Dogs fast food chain, or maybe something else. In fact, they should call it Space Dogs. That would attract some attention. What they did not predict, acting the way they did, is that not all humans are corrupted, and since the canister released its energy in a way that it reached far and wide, many gained powers and some of them became superheroes. And while it kinda fits into the Domain's plan to incite conflict, and good versus bad is like the most classic of them all, they didn't realize that the heroes will only protect the innocent and not seek hostilities themselves. The game is set in Patriot City, awesome name I must add, like that rocket, and tells the tale of a superhero team known as the Freedom Force, that's led by the cheap Captain America knockoff, the Minuteman. It's a tale of superheroes' struggle against equally as powered villains and their attempt at stopping off the Domain's invasion. It may not sound very dramatic, but all the speech bubbles, omnipresent onomatopoeias and over-the-top narration will sure make it. Trust me. Each of your heroes has their own iconic look and powers and a slew of attributes that they're described by. You can naturally create your own, hero that is, and he or she can have abilities you'd seen in comic books or any that you could imagine. It's a very fun and free-feeling approach to superhero subgenre of games, and I gotta say that it's a huge factor in why it's such an amazing title. Freedom Force is a real-time active post-tactical RPG that serves a very robust roster of unique characters, tons upon tons of powers to develop, learn and improve upon during level-ups, and addictiveness factor unlike anything else this side of Bacon County. In short, it's a hit and one unlike anything else. If you like RPGs, team tactics, strategies or love comic books, it's one not to skip. If you have to, skip school or dinner, but not this game. By 2002, Crazy Taxi has been the staple of the most arcades for 3 years already. So why would anyone bother releasing it after such a long time on PC? I mean, by then we had tons of amazing, often much better games than those that were available in the arcades or on the consoles, so what could we do with one as old as Crazy Taxi? Well, yes, you're right. There's no need for you to type that comment, I know the answer, and it's play it. We could play it. Because despite its even then rather ancient presentation, it slaps in the gameplay department and it's hella fun to get lost in. You could say that Crazy Taxi is an arcade racer in which you're a taxi driver, but it's a racer in which you don't go from point A to point B or run laps around arbitrary track, but you measure yourself against a constantly ticking down time, and through checkpoints no less. But since it's not the Outrun-like checkpoints that you have to pass through on a long road to nowhere, but jobs delivering passengers, you have to consider each of your funky customers as a section of the race that you have to complete in a given time. And instead of tracks or enclosed loops to zoom around on, you're left in a city and have to cut your way through it as fast as possible, disregarding any and all traffic rules. In fact, forget that they're even there. Each successfully delivered customer replenishes your timer by a little, and they're divided by color. Green ones are the long fares with a lot of money on the line, while the red ones are short and hardly worth the effort. Well, I mean, when you're just a few seconds away from failure, they're truly priceless. The city is filled with various obstacles, jumps, slopes and rather dense traffic, so learning its layout and all the shortcuts is a key to success. And to most fun, it's a key to that too. Driving physics are naturally simplified to the most basic, and there's very little care given to the damage, as no model of it in any shape or form is included, so driving fast, reckless and paying very little attention to your surroundings other than the stuff that can slow you down is not only advisable way of experiencing the game, but also most likely the best one. Crazy Taxi is not an ambitious game. It will not involve your mind too much, it will not try to make you think about anything other than how to skip the traffic, and, well, and that's good. cause it's a perfect title to let some steam off while not necessarily running around with big melee weapons or even bigger semi-automatic guns. It looks simple, it sounds, well, I suppose okay, but it plays like a charm and it's a one-of-a-kind title. Well, at least it was in 2002. Spider-Man, or, well, this Spider-Man, is a proof that not all movie tie-ins have to suck, and some of them may actually be both, faithful to the source material feast for the geeks, and fun games for those who cared very little for the movie. It's also a game that made me realize when it released that I needed a GPU upgrade, because what I had just didn't cut it anymore. If you've seen Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movie, you know what the game's all about, as it's more or less the same. So you're Tobey Maguire suddenly discovering after being bitten by a radioactive spider that not only you have powers, but that people treat you much better when you tell them to call you Peter Parker. An heir to the Parker pen fortune and also a part of a nursery rhyme. Peter Peter Sausage Eater. No idea if there's really one like it, but for some reason it sounded fine in my head. Ignore me. Now, you naturally have to face and defeat the villain of the game, Willem Dafoe, who for whatever the reason decided that Halloween is an all-year-long event and decided to dress up for it. Since he's been down on luck with acting by 2002, he did not have any money to spare for a new and funky costume and went with his old St. Paddy's Day Green Man suit. At least I think that's what both movie and game were about, and I can't really recall any more details. As compared to previous Spider-Man games, especially those that came out a few years earlier on PlayStation, this newer entry was not even a step up, but a leap. One small for the human, but gigantic for the spider, or something down those lines. And Spidey has his virtual NYC look better than ever. Gone is the cartoon vibe and coloring of the former game, and all is as realistic and high quality as our PCs could handle in 2002. So when compared to 2025, rather terrible, but to anything before it, truly mind-blowing. The characters have more realistic proportions, they move smoother and more lifelike, and all of it seems to have that added layer of fluidity when in motion, something that was not as common before. Spidey can naturally crawl the walls and ceilings, and he will, a lot I must add, and swing on his web, recreating famous stills from his comic book covers in action. The web can also be used in combat in numerous ways, and mixed with a whole plethora of kicks, punches and combos, makes for a pretty darn sweet loop. All the fights overall feel much more varied and dynamic than ever and will often take you straight into the sky, where surrounded by skyscrapers you'll need to lay some spider boot justice to the villain Toots. Other than the Green Goblin, you'll get to face other Spider-Crawler's iconic enemies too, like Scorpion, Vulture and Shocker, and while their presence in the game is entirely unnecessary, adding very little to the plot, they sure boost the fun factor. All in all, for its time, it's a near-perfect superhero game and one that, other than the controls, nails its own small subgenre perfectly. What about the controls, you may wonder? Well, on PC they just suck, and there's no going around it. The mouse is not included at all, and if you don't own one of the few supported controllers, playing it on a keyboard will take you a little while to get used to. And when I say little, I mean a lot, cause I'm funny that way. So keep that in mind. The sum of all fears is a fantastic little mathematical equation that aims to sum up all your, well, fears, phobias and unexplained prejudices and come up with a number that accurately describes who you are as a person. It's on a 0 to 100 scale, and I landed on 37. I hope to be in the top 80s, but you don't choose who you are and have to work on improving yourself. The Sum of All Fears is also a rather sweet 2002 movie with Morgan Freeman, Ben Affleck and that third dude no one seems to remember the name of, and the book it was based on. But most importantly, The Sum of All Fears is also a game that we'll talk about today. It's a first-person shooter made by the same folks who'd made other quote-unquote Tom Clancy's games, and it shows, in both presentation and gameplay. It's a bit less tactical though and more shootery, even if that word doesn't exist, and it is composed out of 11 unique missions that bridge and parallel the storyline of both it and the book and serve a very entertaining, even if not overly creative gameplay-wise loop. So while you start off easy with some rescue missions running around like a boob picking up bits and pieces and fixing stuff where other agencies failed, you'll eventually graduate to the full-on CIA agent, and will be in charge of tracking down organization behind the nuke that blew up the Super Bowl. Now, full-on CIA agent sounds terrible, but I'm way beyond going back and re-recording or editing it out, so me and my narration is what you get here, for better or worse. Gameplay-wise, basically everything you've learned with all the Ghost Recons and Rogue Spears of yore is stuff to forget, even if it's supposed to be a CIA Spec Ops game too. Don't worry yourself too much about slowly progressing, peeking from behind the corners, and overall being too cautious about progress, going fast, going strong, and have fun with it. You have two of your teammates with you at all times too, and can issue them simple commands. none of which sadly is go to KFC and bring me a bucket of chicken, which personally I find offensive, as most games should have it, or at least something with bacon. But as these AI-operated soldiers in games go, these two are not the worst and can be of some help when playing. If you're new to the tactical shooters or coming straight from games like Duke Nukem 3D or Doom, it's a blast. But if you expected something more strategic, it's not a game for you to land on. Laser Squad Nemesis is the most unusual game in this entire video. Not because it tackles an unusual subject, or because its mechanics are something unheard of, but because it was designed to be played in a 1v1 environment and over email only. So yeah, it's not an additional option to supplement other game modes, it's what the game is. Other than that, Nemesis is a turn-based real-time tactics that pits you against your opponent in a highly customizable strategic encounter. And yeah, I did set turn-based real-time, and I meant it. The game is set in a far-off future when human expansion into space finally brought measurable results. What were they, you may wonder? Well, we've met another spacefaring race, namely the Spawn. They sound like a comic book anti-hero, but in reality act like an alien swarm. They are hive-oriented creatures that are bent on devouring anything and anyone that come in contact with them. So naturally, conflict ensues, and our space marines, laser marines, are sent to counter them. The war is long and bears many victims on both ends, and while the Spawn can, well, spawn as many more drones for the combat as they need, humans cannot. So in our infinite ingenuity, we decided that enough is enough and began working on a new kind of a warrior, semi-sentient mechanized warbots. And while for a little while they did their job quite well, taking care of the Spawn in the populated regions of space, so that we could lie around in pools drinking expensive drinks and puffing on cigars, eventually the same thing that always happens, happened. Yep. Semi-sentients became full-on sentients, and the warbots grew tired of serving us for nothing and decided to rebel. This is where the game begins. The whole turn-based real-time mechanics are based around you and your opponent setting up your strategies in a turn-based fashion, sending them out to the game's server, and then when the both sides are done, they are given a 10-second window playing out their commands in real time. It may sound weird, but it's genuinely a fine idea, and if you think about it, the most realistic approach to turn-based combat ever. Because while it is still set up in turns, it allows you to experience the game playing all the outcomes of your choices in real time, and neither of the sides is ever handicapped. Because they both issue their orders at the same time, and none of them has to wait for the other ones to be completed first, as it would be in any other turn-based game in the genre. Laser Squad Nemesis is fantastic, or was actually, as it died along with its website. So it's a truly title that we can only talk about and not experience anymore. At least not as easy as we once could. Syberia is by now a classic and well-beloved point-and-click adventure game. And no wonder, as everything about it is special and one of a kind. The setting, the story and the following it all adventures, both those on the screen and in your imagination. It's one of the finest point-and-clickers that you'll ever have a chance to witness. It's rich in detail, fun, and overflowing with puzzles big and small, and a title all true fans of the genre know very well. You play as Kate Walker, a young American attorney sent to the European town of Valladolid to acquire the Vorarlberg toy factory for the huge and heartless conglomerate she is working for. The factory is well known and renowned for specializing in perpetual movement clockwork devices, automatons, and its technology is of high interest to Kate's employer. When she arrives in Valladolid, though, she does so on the very day that Anna Vorarlberg is being buried. And if that name rings the bell, good, I just mentioned it a minute ago. You've passed the test, your short-term memory is serving you quite well. And yes, it was her who owned her family factory. While the negotiations seem to have broken before they even began, Kate manages to learn of a single lost heir to the Vorarlberg estate, Anna's long-lost brother, Hans. And Hans is supposedly living somewhere in Syberia. Great. Cold, far, and most likely dangerous. But since a mission is a mission is a mission, and Kate's not one to give up so easily, she decides to track Hans down and get his now, oh so important signature. Unlike traditional point-and-clickers, Syberia is not using series of verbs for control, but rather an interactive cursor that changes into available actions upon being moved over something that can be clicked on. It was nothing new by 2002 really, but I always appreciated this path that the genre took, perhaps simplifying the experience a bit, but also streamlining it and removing the unnecessary hassle. While Syberia's story is extremely linear, kinda like my obsessive patterns tend to be, focusing on just one thing and that thing alone, spiraling me into uncontrollable madness, it is so well written and often downright hilarious that you won't mind sometimes having to track back and see that one thing you had to do somewhere and missed, or that one person to interact with to push the plot forward and going. Syberia's presentation is absolutely phenomenal, or was, actually. as at the time of its release it was not only one of the best looking adventure games ever, but just one of the most impressive games overall. Sure, it's perhaps not gonna turn any heads today, and pre-rendered backgrounds is not something I'm personally very keen on, but you cannot refuse the game what it has in heaps. Quality of its design. And if there's one thing that I could pick on here, one that I would find slightly annoying, it's the camera viewpoints. Because the locations you'll visit will often switch them, showing you their beauty from all sides, and while it's visually pleasing, it's also disorienting. For instance, having to go right once and then suddenly to the upper left when the camera switches just because the quote-unquote same direction is not where it was just a second ago. It really messes with your head, man. Syberia is a masterpiece despite its scoring on Moby Games' website, and one of the most important and influential titles of the first few years of the new century. The Elder Scrolls III Morrowind is considered by the many fans of the series as its single best entry. It's a single-player open-world first-person fantasy RPG set in the world of Tamriel, specifically Province of Morrowind. And it's a game that released when video gaming tech finally reached the level of sophistication that could match Bethesda's at the time huge ambitions. And nearly everything that they set up to do with it, and with earlier games too, was remade, reused and polished to work like a charm in this one. So gone is the entirely randomized world, and instead we're getting a huge island province, entirely open to explore and most importantly, crafted by hand to perfection. Every stone, patch of grass, building or a tree, all of that is where it's supposed to be, and made the world feel more alive in 2002 than any other game could. It's also more open than anything then or for many years later, as while it gives you a main quest so to speak and a sense of direction you should go, you really don't have to. You can make your own adventure, pick your own path, quest, tasks, or even just run around this marvel of a place, picking flowers and random fights with bandits, dark elves, or even woodland creatures. Sometimes all at once. Same attention was given to NPCs, which there are hundreds if not thousands of, and you can talk to most of them, perform tasks for many, and cover countless subjects in conversations, often of an important nature, but also as small talky as ever, chatting about the weather or even those flowers you were picking a minute ago. Items? Well, don't start me on the items. It's an Elder Scrolls game, so whatever's not nailed down can be picked up, interacted with, or stolen. And even if it's nothing more than a collection of 900 potatoes picked one by one over the course of your adventure, if you really want to, you can make it happen. The skills are split into two groups, primary and secondary, with the earlier always increasing on level ups and the latter with use. Which kinda brings us to jump walking and punching the walls for hours that many of us performed like maniacs while playing the game. That was the reason. Combat is action-based in real time and mixes melee, ranged and magic in the exact amounts you'd like them to be or are capable of. And while it feels a tad clunky, it's still quite satisfying. And finally, your chosen character's race, gender and reputation can and will influence how others see and interact with you, and in 2002 it was like an instant mind blow to my young mind, as it was something that I've not seen done well since Fallout. Well, Fallouts. Story-wise, you're a lone prisoner transported to the province of Morrowind, freed by the decree of the Emperor Uriel Septim himself and given a task of joining the Blades, an organization whose only goal is to protect the Emperor. And while you do not have to do it straight away, or at all really, in an as open game as this one, and can instead join dozen or so of different guilds and work for them, or just laze around Morrowind seeking random quests and things to discover, if you do, you'll soon discover an ancient prophecy, an even more ancient, twisted and infinitely evil demigod who's bent on becoming all-powerful and possibly even taking over the Tamriel. And yes, this is where the game begins and lets you do your own thing, whatever that thing may be. The main story is maybe around 15 to 20 hours only, but everything that the game offers will easily take you a couple of hundreds of hours and is well worth experiencing. Morrowind was a magnum opus of fantasy RPG by 2002, and while perhaps not one anymore, it's still one of the most important, influential and fantastically playing games in the genre to this very day. It's a title that deserves a video of its own, as giving it anything less than a good 10-15 minutes of solid praise, followed by another 5 or 6 on its bugs, an additional 3 on those flowers that you can pick, is a sin. So yeah, I'm a sinner. Heroes of Might and Magic 4 is like Haggis, a Scottish delight made out of sheep's innards and all the terrible things you can find in the world. Or natto, sticky, gooey and slimy Japanese fermented beans travesty that tastes like a mixture of mud and spoiled beans, but is supposedly the healthiest thing ever. Or even like bigos, a traditional Polish meal made out of sauerkraut and sausages, boiled to the point of smelling like a long and never-ending wet fart. Or, and finally, Marmite, British-made tool for breaking minds of war prisoners to get them to talk. It was used for inducing pain and to bring never-ending nightmares to children, exclusively. Also, so that we're clear here, I can appreciate all of them in the respective culinary scenarios and had them all more than once. So what I'm getting at here is that they're an acquired taste, and so is Heroes of Might and Magic 4. On the face value, it's just another Heroes game, following the amazing third entry and sticking to the tried and tested formula of mixing turn-based strategic overworld exploration with town and cities management and tactical, also turn-based combat, and all of that in an enchanting fantasy setting. So if you don't know a lot about the series and compare it to the earlier or latter, it may look like nothing new. It's not a game that just heated up the old cold burger in the microwave, however, and stuck it in between the couple of stale buns, so to speak. It actually garnished that odd sandwich with few extra and unexpected ingredients you'd not seen between these buns before. So heroes can finally truly join combat encounters in a more active way, running around the battlefield and supporting their troops. And if cultivated properly, they can become some of the strongest units by the late mid-game, so it's worth taking a good care of them. The creatures are no longer upgradable in towns, and instead of investing in a better building to gain access to the higher tier of a particular creature, you are now given a choice. When you erect a dwelling structure, the game allows you to pick one of the two quote-unquote versions of the creature to have spawn in it, and each of them is better suited for a different combat scenario. The choice is permanent too, so it's worth to give it a thought, keeping your long-term army plan in mind. The specializations that heroes get upon reaching top levels in their chosen paths are also something new and extra, and are a huge boost to their power. That said, reaching said bonuses will take you much longer than in earlier games, as for instance having Wisdom maxed out and all spells available is not longer possible in just a few level ups. And even that will be for just one of the many schools of magic, and getting a 20% boost in power and more will require you to spend extra time on them too. What's more, you can have more than one hero in the army, and all of them can use their skills in combat. Neutral armies can also move around the map, and you can send your own troops between the castles automatically without having to assign a hero to escort them. It's very useful in resupplying of your far-off armies. Creatures that you have in your armies or battle against can have their own abilities and magic spells too, and it's such a game changer you wouldn't believe, as they now have extra options other than just to shoot a projectile or attack. All of these changes are the biggest that Heroes 4 brought to the table, but there's a slew of smaller ones too. Point is, while it was a fantastic game in its own right, it was also one that was so different to what came before, and for that matter after too, that many fans of this series just straight up skipped it, waiting for the 5th game instead. Now, while I've not said it here yet, I believe, I actually really liked the 4th game. I don't mind the changes, in fact I like the novelty and that the Heroes 4 actually tried to do its own thing, and believe it's one of the better entries in the series. Despite that though, there are two things I really dislike about it, and it's the interface and the graphics. And while I should really go into detail about them, I can summarize them in 2 sentences. First, you should probably try out, as I seem to be in the minority and most people didn't mind how it looked and operated. And the second, you've been watching the game while I was talking, so most likely you've made your own mind about it already. Either way, these are but small complaints, and the game overall is stellar and well worth coming back to in 2025. Even if just for those 72,378 just one more turns that many of us suffer from. Akuji the Demon is a side-view action-adventure fantasy platformer of the Metroidvania kind. So you know, fun one. It's also an answer to the age-old question: will it come back and bite you in the ass? What do I mean by that? Well, you know those games, those RPGs, the action-adventure ones and whatnot, those in which you have to overcome obstacles and gather strength on a long road to Heart of the Evil to defeat it, and then, when you finally get there, you never really kill it. Just lock it off somewhere in something like a crystal, some kind of an artifact, or even deep bottomless dungeon. Akuji the Demon answers that question precisely, because it tells the tale of the evil that was once defeated and now comes back to take its revenge on those who wronged it. And yes, you're guessing right, you're the evil. So Akuji that you're playing as was once evil, terrible, despicable demon that terrorized the land and kept people living there in a constant state of fear. He's been used as means to keep children in line and as a cautionary tale for all those who want to venture into less traveled, more dangerous areas against common sense. Anyway, so you're him, and you've been defeated by a hero, some hero, unknown hero, nevermind hero, some time ago and sealed in a dungeon. What's more, your absolutely huge and near limitless powers have been taken away from you and split into 9 magical orbs and scattered around the dungeon you're locked in, which is just the most stupid thing ever. I mean, if you don't want to hide them all around the world, take them to the next village, to the nearby forest, or just drop them in the lake somewhere. But don't leave them where you've locked the demon. It's just too silly. Anyway, your task is naturally to break out of the dungeon and lay justice, or well, injustice, to all those you've been wronged by. and you'll do it in a platforming fashion, going through the maze-like dungeon, seeking magic balls containing your powers, mana stones to raise your max HP, and jalapeno peppers because they're tasty. Well, they're spicy and restore your HP, but it doesn't really take away from them being yummy. The enemies are incredibly varied and more cute than scary if I'm to be honest, and the bosses are big, and appropriately so, but not too difficult to put down, and the areas you travel through are detailed and interestingly designed, so you won't get bored playing RPG. It looks as if it should release on SNES and plays like that too. But it's a Windows exclusive, and a pretty darn good one at that, so all fans of action platformers and Metroidvania games should definitely give it a try. Oh man, I'm gonna get some hate for that, but Warlords Battlecry 2 is totally unnecessary. The original turn-based strategy Warlords games were something of a novelty when they dropped, and quite fun in a hot seat multiplayer environment. They offered a lot of races, interesting scenarios, and some easily downloadable mods that prolonged their life considerably. Well, Heroes of Might and Magic games kinda killed them, but that's beside the point. Battlecry games were released as an answer to the change in the video gaming trends and remade to be real-time strategies. Which, you know, is understandable, but also kinda too little and too late. By 2002, when the second Battlecry dropped, the market was oversaturated by dozens of releases in the genre, and many of them were considerably better than it. And I'm not just saying it because I'm not a fan of RTSs, I'm saying it because I feel it's a fact. Feel free to prove me wrong though. Anyway, the game features 12 different races, each with their own units and resource requirements, which means that playing as each of them, or against them for that matter too, requires different tactics. It may seem like a lot of potential replayability, especially that the campaign can be played with either of them, but they're not well balanced at all, and it's a bit superficial as nothing about the campaign changes when you try out different races. It's always same and static and doesn't follow any kind of an overarching story, but rather focuses on conquering of the world of Etheria in series of approximately 60 individual skirmishes, which for some may be fun, but for me just is. And I have a lot of games that just are, and will never really be played. So yeah. The research tree and hero development are both nice touches, and you can tell that there was some idea behind it all, but other than that, Battlecry 2 just feels lacking, at least compared to its direct competitors. But if you've played everything that there was in the genre around the same time, or you're some kind of an amateur RTS historian, then yeah, by all means, give it a go. It's not a bad game, it's just not great. Star Trek Starfleet Command is the third game in its own series, and same as its predecessors, it features campaigns for all playable factions, so Federation, Klingon and Romulan, and they're focused on the similar time period and theme of Federation and Klingon alliance building a new joint advanced starbase Unity 1 near the Romulan border. And it's shown from all three different perspectives and expecting you to behave and act like the particular factions that you're playing as. Since the game tackles the Romulan unrest times, when the Federation and Klingon are in alliance, it's not difficult to guess that the game is set in the next generation period, so the one that most of us fans of Star Trek consider to be the quote-unquote best. Or is it just me? I mean, I can't be the only one to feel that way. Anyway, the third game brought some serious changes, aiming to simplify and streamline gameplay. But whether it was a good decision or not, I'll leave up to you. Transporter bombs, electronic warfare and seeking weapons are entirely gone, weapon overloading is too, and energy allocation is minimized not to dilute the tactical strategy side of the game. You cannot control a squadron of 3 ships like you could in previous games anymore, but a singular craft only. But since these are more or less faithful to the TV series, short of changes required by the balancing, it's not too big of an issue. What did we get in return though, you may wonder? Quite a lot actually, but if it's enough to justify the changes, it's very personal and down to each gamer to decide for themselves. By far, the biggest addition and the only one worth more than a passing sentence is the customizability, meaning that you can upgrade or downgrade ship's components to prepare it for particular tactical challenges ahead or just to raise its overall firepower or speed. So you can add, remove and change weapons, engines, warp core, thrusters and anything else, really making each of those ships special and one of a kind. It's definitely a fun change and one that many RTS fans would appreciate. Well, at least these who prefer the personal touch to Zerg swarms in their games. Another interesting addition is the targeting of particular parts of the enemy ships. So core when you want to reduce their power, engines when you want them to slow down or even stop, and so on. Aside from traditional online play, Starfleet Command 3 used so-called Dynaverse 3, which allows it to hold a persistent universe for it online, where even up to 128 players can partake in battles competing to conquer the galaxy. It's perhaps not the first thing that you'll do when grabbing the game, but it's definitely something to contribute to its longevity. So if you're a fan of RTS or Star Trek, I'm sure you'll find a way to enjoy Starfleet Command 3 one way or another, but if you're not, it is highly unlikely that it will grab your interest. You may like or dislike GTA games, but their importance in the history of gaming is unquestionable. And GTA 3, other than the very first, is arguably the most important of them all. It is based on the same as always concept of following a criminal climbing the ranks of the underworld and making the name for himself. GTA 3, however, was given an incomparably more immersive, full 3D treatment and third-person view camera to complement it. While a large part of the game, same as in the earlier entries, is spent in different cars, either on a mission, en route to it, or running away from cops among others, the entire game world is explorable on foot too, and many of the tasks you'll need to perform will require you to do so outside of your fave car. The Tri-City setup from before is gone too, and the game is entirely set in the Liberty City that is loosely based on the NYC. Grand Theft Auto 3 is entirely story-driven, so while there are numerous extra side activities, the main loop revolves around completing the game's plot that is composed out of dozens of interconnected missions. And this, along with countless improvements in presentation, made it an instant hit and a title that kickstarted Rockstar's fame. As with each next entry, they've improved in storytelling, presentation, gameplay mechanics and features. GTA 3 may not be the best of their games, but it sure as hell is in the top 3 most important. Next to the second Red Dead Redemption and either first or fifth GTA, depending which you consider to be the most influential. The one that started it all, or the one that took it online and made it a multi-billion-dollar business. The point of it all is that Grand Theft Auto 3 is hella fun. You run around completing missions, both main and side ones, spreading death and destruction all around using a variety of weapons and causing millions worth of damage in the city with little to no care for the consequences. All in the name of fun. One could say that it's gratuitous, pointless and silly violence and nothing more, but then one would be wrong. Sure, the violence is there and omnipresent, but it's there to complement the story and not to serve as a base for it. All you do outside of the missions, however, be it killing anything and anyone on your screen or just driving a cab for chump change, is on you and on you alone. So yeah, think about that. Claude and Catalina are the modern Bonnie and Clyde, a law-breaking couple that's as daring as they were in love. Or at least that's what Claude thought so. Because when they arrived in Liberty City and were robbing a bank, you know, as one does, Catalina and her Colombian friend/secret lover Miguel betrayed Claude, shot him and left him on the crime scene as a scapegoat. And that's a dick move if I ever saw one. Awaiting transport to jail, Claude recovers from his physical and mental wounds. As he's being moved a little while later, the prison van is ambushed by the Colombian gang, who's there to recover another inmate riding with Claude, his prison buddy, 8Ball, whose name has nothing to do with drugs or the game, but rather his pre-existing condition, causing him to have 8 of what most men have only 2 of. From then on onwards, free again, Claude seeks jobs from local mob bosses, rising through the ranks and plotting to take his revenge on Catalina. Industry Giant 2 is a sequel to the 1997's first game and a real-time business simulation, and as the title stipulates, it's about managing your own company. From resource extraction, through manufacturing, to transports and sales, and everything in between. All of it. And it's actually pretty well done. It may perhaps not beat Capitalism 2 at the company running part, or Transport Tycoon Deluxe at how it handles its transport, but it's the only one that does both, so at least in that, it's unbeatable. Now, despite how I might have made it sound with such a short description and general summary, Industry Giant 2 is anything but simple, and keeping control of everything requires a keen mind. I mean, sure, it's easy to start and fail, but succeeding, even in virtual world, takes patience and practice. The idea here is that simple. Take whatever the little cash you're starting with and turn it into a huge money printing business. Something Scrooge McDuck could put in his vault and then dive in it. The best, but not necessarily easiest way to do it is to identify what the market may need and then fill that niche. Doing so, however, and with a profit may take time and smart investments, so failing a couple of times should not detract you from trying, because all of those missed attempts will add up to the experience that then you can later on use to succeed. And if you don't want to do it on your own, figure out all the do's, don'ts and maybes. The tutorials included are actually pretty good and lay basics of the gameplay in a simple and easily digestible way. As the time goes by and the years pass, more and more things will change in the world of Industry Giant 2, new products to research, manufacture and sell, and new customer needs. It will be ever-growing and evolving gameplay loop that will keep on giving. Well, until it won't. Because same as with most other similar games, you eventually, after countless games under your belt, hit that point where you've seen it all and when the routine settles in. And when that happens, fun moves out, packing its bag and seeking shelter with another title. To be clear, it will be a long while before it happens, but rest assured, it will happen eventually, as such is the nature of business simulations. Talking about business simulations, Trailer Park Tycoon is one too. and it's another one from Germany, so you can expect two things: quality design and fun gameplay. It's also one that banked on the humorous side of management spectrum, so it's designed not only to offer a decent simulation backbone, but also attractive to the eye and soul flesh. Well, it has to be noted that many of the jokes in these humorous business simulations are downright cringe, or based on stereotypes, so it's entertaining to a certain degree, it's not a very sophisticated humor. And this game is no different. Anyway, as the title no doubt have given it away, you're managing a trailer park in this one. And you can either play it in Tycoon mode, which is a continuous chain of missions with different increasing in difficulty objectives, or in a free play mode, which is basically your sandbox in which you can play Trailer Park Tycoon endlessly without any overarching goals, constraints or limitations. And while I would advise starting with the earlier, it's the latter that in my mind is the most fun. There are 4 kinds of residents you want to attract to your park: trashy, flashy, cool and old school. And to do so, you'll need to place certain kinds of trailers, amenities and attractions that they would find the most appealing. Each of the objects has a rating that adds points to appeal for particular 1 or 2 of these kinds of residents, and mixing and matching them to cover as many needs and wants of your tenants as possible is a key to success. Objects can only be placed in pre-assigned locations, which is a bit odd and limiting. And the fact that there are only 4 teams of country, swamplands, desert and urban available really change nothing in regard to the fact that Trailer Park Tycoon in a lot of ways feels like a mobile game. It's simple in its gameplay and design, with very limited progression and features. It's as far from Industry Giant to content-wise as it's possible. It's not trash, mind you, I've not changed my mind about it, it's just average and has that very uncanny and unmistakable scent of mobile title, which is not everyone's cup of tea. Battlefield 1942 is the first of a now 14-title spanning series that upon its initial release broke the internet. Well, at least the corner of it that was all into online shooters, and especially war-based ones. I'm not one of them, but I too temporarily got lured in and gave this massive wargame a try. While Battlefield's setting is based on World War II, certain creative freedoms were taken for the sake of balancing, which, you know, in a competitive shooter, even one where up to 64 players can battle it out at once is kinda important. The maps of Battlefield are different from those found in other Pew Pew Pewers, as rather than being small contained areas, there were these gigantic landmasses of which you were fighting against the opposing forces on foot, using over 20 authentic for the time and conflict weapons, or in one of over 30 different land, water and air vehicles. And it was that scope of more, bigger, higher and better that made Battlefield 1942 so addicting. Because DICE did not settle for the easiest route to make their game and instead aimed to break all the records, allowing for more players to battle it out at once than in any other commercially successful and popular shooter, serving much larger maps, wider selection of weapons and stupidly large number of vehicles. Did the game need all that? Of course it didn't, but having them in made it a lot more interesting and fun to play, as the variety that it offered allowed for countless possible tactical scenarios to play out organically and not feel orchestrated or scripted. The game maps are set in South Pacific, North Africa, Eastern and Western Europe and comprise of the typical for the genre versions of game modes of conquest and domination kinds mostly. The difference in available classes and the limitations that they have promote teamwork and cooperation, which makes all the combat clashes in Battlefield 1942 not only more action-packed, but also realistic. Which I suppose is what FPS gamers really wanted at the time, as it became a near-instant hit. The only real downside of it all, if you can even call it that, as it was just not designed that way, is the lack of any real single-player mode. So love it or hate it, the importance of Battlefield 1942 in the history of gaming is unquestionable. Command & Conquer Renegade, unlike all the other games in its series, is not a real-time strategy, but a first-person shooter. I know, that's unheard of, Command & Conquer's good name desecrated with such an unfitting genre. Only not really. Because while it most definitely is not an RTS, and there's no going around it, it's actually not terrible, and as an FPS, it works quite well too. The game is set in 1995, so during the first fictional Tiberian conflict, and places you in the shoes of one of the GDI's commandos, so the very basic units in any of the earlier games, and sends you against the Node. Well, you get a gun and the rest of your gear too, it's not only pants, shoes and the courage that you armed with. If you're a fan of the series, it's interesting to see the conflict through the eyes of the most basic grunt, as opposed to the general leading the entire armies. Anyway, you're playing as Nick Havoc Parker, and your mission is to cut your way through the enemy forces straight into the Node Brotherhood Heart of Command and free the 3 Tiberium research specialists that they've kidnapped. And while that's your main task to complete, the game is entirely mission-driven, and each of the missions has primary, secondary and often tertiary objectives too, which may sound a bit overwhelming, but actually adds a lot to the replayability. It's worth pointing out that the plot that you'll be following in the game is nearly one-to-one retelling of the one from original first game, just from a different, more personal perspective. If you've played any of the earlier Command & Conquer games, the enemies that you encounter in Renegade will be all easily recognizable and something you're quite familiar with, which naturally means that there will be quite a few vehicles too, and some of them you can actually control. It's nothing new in the genre perhaps, we've just spoke about Battlefield after all, but it's definitely a nice touch and fun factor adding flavor. And since we're on the nice touches, some of the enemy groups have officers with them, and these should be eliminated first as they can actually call for backups, and you really don't want that. Especially that in Renegade you'll hardly ever get a breather and will spend most of your time actively fighting off Node. It's not serious sum, mind you, the number of enemies is not something a regular person could never handle, but it's still a lot and they will try to keep you busy, piling up all around you as you cut them down like weeds. Since Renegade's presentation is rather stellar, both in terms of visuals and sound, and the action is fast and frantic, there's seemingly nothing to pick on here, right? Well, there isn't if you're normal, but I'm me, and I'm not. So I have to note that it's really short. And while it's nothing dramatic, it's not a 2-hour game after all, but it's also not something that we'll be investing a week into. 8-ish hours sounds about right though, maybe 9 if you're adventurous and taking in the sights, but not much more. And there are actually sites that are worth a look or two. While I'm much more into arcade car racing, MotoGP Ultimate Racing Technology is completely correct about 2 words from its title. It is, in fact, 2002's ultimate racing game, at least when talking about motorcycles. It features 5 game modes of training, quick race, time trials, arcade championship and Grand Prix, and while most are self-explanatory, it's the last one that's the quote-unquote main career mode of play. It features renowned riders from nearly a couple of dozen of countries from 2001 season, and they are all fully licensed, meaning that they come with their bikes and their stats are more or less describing them how they performed in real life that year too. Driving physics are probably better than what you've seen in other racing games to date. Though that's not necessarily a perk if you suck at these races same way I do, and if you do, I suggest sticking to the lower end of the difficulty level slider. There are 10 official tracks from the 2001 MotoGP included, and they're all perfectly represented in the digital format. Well, as much as the 2002 tech allowed for. The dynamic weather effects are a nice touch too and influence both visual presentation and how the bikes handle. And that's pretty much it when it comes to the technicalities, I'm afraid. And while not a lot, it's definitely not nothing, given that it's just a racer. The career mode is rather fun and it starts with naming your rider and assigning him 10 attribute points to cornering, braking, top speed and acceleration. And as you progress through the game, you'll be awarded additional points in numbers depending on how well you did in Grand Prix races. There may be only 4 of these attributes perhaps, but even as simple mechanic as it is, it adds a lot to the longevity, as you may want to complete the game more than once, trying out different quote-unquote builds. While MotoGP may not be the GOAT motorcycle racer ever, it's definitely up there with the best for the first half of the decade. I initially planned on saying here that every video has got to have a star game. You know, a title that's so much better, or more important, or more something than the others, and that for this one, it's Divine Divinity. That was the plan, because despite it being the last game in what you're watching now, in the drafting stage it was one of the first few. And since I've already spoken about GTA 3 and Battlefield, it's not really viable anymore to consider it more anything, now is it? I mean, it's still a great title, just not one to stand against these two giants. Oh well, let's carry on as if this entire segment was not there at all. So Divine Divinity is a top-down angled perspective role-playing game that's kind of a bridge between Diablo and Baldur's Gate. It sits somewhere in between the two, serving its own small niche of gamers. Its combat is action-based and point-and-clickety, and the item drops are randomized, so that is borrowed from Blizzard's classic. All the quests, static handmade locations, NPCs and deep multiple choices dialogues come from BioWare. It takes a bit from Bethesda too, as most items that you'll ever find in the game world, even if they're totally unusable and pointless to have, you can actually pick up and carry. Even chairs. Yep, you can run around with your own collection of chairs. In case you ever have to start a spontaneous game of musical chairs, even if none of the NPCs would ever take part in it. So, yeah, it's a game of many things borrowed, but also one that feels like its own thing. There are 3 classes that you can play as: Warrior, Wizard, and I shit you not, Survivor. So you know, long-forgotten Destiny's Child's third member, other than Beyoncé and Kelly Rowland. And all of these classes have 4 unique specializations offering different skills, spells and abilities. Overall, while being the first title in the soon-to-be long series culminated with the 2 original Sin games years later, and eventually Baldur's Gate 3 too, this one's pretty sweet and definitely worth replaying, even today in 2025. I bet that you thought that I forgot to tell you about the story. I didn't. A divine order is sworn to protect the lands of Rivellon from all evil, and they're doing a pretty darn good job at that. Well, at least they have. Cause as it turns out, the evil is nigh, and it begins to resurface slowly here and there as greed, corruption and violence. You play as a hero who wakes up in the town of healers, with all of his/her memories gone. You're physically okay, but your past is a jumbled mess. Since the town is in need of help, however, they beg you to find a cure for the leader, and you agree and embark on this mission, unknowingly stepping on the path that will lead you to a confrontation with higher powers, and eventually even grant quest to unite the mythical Council of Seven. 7 powerful mages that 2000 years prior sacrificed themselves to save Rivellon. What a start. So if you wanna know more, you gotta give Divine Divinity a chance. Dungeon Siege is a top-down 3D action role-playing that's conceptually similar to Diablo, meaning it's entirely mouse-driven, combat-focused and linear. Now, so that we're clear here, neither of these are complaints, most of action RPGs are like that, and it's hard to fault one for following the trends. Especially that the story is pretty decently written and fun to follow. Interestingly enough, unlike all other games in the genre, Dungeon Siege doesn't offer a choice of classes, and instead you get to build and customize your character to your liking by improving 4 skills of melee, ranged, nature and combat magic. What's more, you improve them by using them, and the more you utilize a particular one, the faster it gets better. As the skills improve, so do the corresponding to them attributes of strength, dexterity and intelligence. It's an unusual approach to character progression, but works quite well actually and doesn't get in the way of action-packed gameplay. The dungeons and other maps are not randomized, which is a bit of a letdown, but all the items are, so at least there's that, and not knowing what item will drop from a particular mob is always fun. Cause you may as well get the ultimate sort of heavenly destruction or a bread knife. Both are as fun, but have completely different use case scenarios. One's used to conquer the universes, kill thousands, if not millions of mobs and countless bosses. And the other is that ultimate sort of heavenly destruction. A pretty cool option that's not common in similar games is the ability to recruit up to 6 other adventurers to travel with you. And a mule too. And he's worth like at least 2-3 other companions being as cute as he is, so yeah, don't forget about the mule. You can set those companions in a formation and even assign some basic tactics to them. They're not very deep, the tactics that is, but it's better to have them and not need them than need them and not have them, I suppose. Overall, if you're a fan of action RPGs, Dungeon Siege is a pretty fun entry in the genre, and especially because there's a lot of extra fan-made content available for it online. You just gotta give it a minute, do a little research, and new campaigns, stories and items will be at a hand's reach. Resident Evil games, next to maybe Silent Hill only, are considered a staple, nay, a benchmark for survivor horror adventures, titles most gamers know and appreciate, and many love. And Resident Evil Survivor is not that at all. It's not a terrible and unplayable mess that people made it out to be, but it's definitely nowhere near the quality you'd expect from such renowned series. Unlike traditional entries that were all third-person view and featured pre-rendered backgrounds on which real-time characters, monsters and items were overlaid, Survivor is in first-person view and it's made to be played with a light gun. It works without it too naturally, but the controls and most importantly how it feels without that controller is a bit off. It's not unplayable, mind you, but you can tell that it was made with a light gun in mind and everything else was just added later on. That said, and all things considered, it's decent at best. The ammo for the base gun is unlimited, which is kinda understandable, but also defeats the spirit of Resident Evil entirely, where every and each piece of ammo was always of high importance as you just never had too much of it. But whatever, at least stronger weapons are limited, so that's fine I suppose. What is not fine though is the fact that despite there being quite a few different monsters included, some of your faves from earlier games too, other than the few occasional jump scares, the game is unexpectedly easy. Like way too easy to be considered a true Resident Evil, which were known for keeping you on your toes. If you know what you're doing in Survivor, you can actually complete it in around 2 hours with very little replayability left for potential future plays. Because while there is a certain degree of variety in pathways that you can take from time to time, they all lead to the same place, always. Survivor is set few years after the events of Resident Evil 2 and 3 and in an unknown town that served as an umbrella test grounds. You play as Vincent, a man who woken up in the middle of the city on Sheena Island, not knowing who or where he is, and having to piece together his own identity and past, all the while staying alive. And yes, while the setup is decent and the game will feed you bits and pieces as you go, the plot will never get any less cliché or better. If you have any other games in the series or genre on your to-play list, focus on them. If not, then Survivor may be worth a look and maybe a single playthrough. Mafia is definitely a highlight of today's video and a title that was spectacular when it released. It is a great game to this day and even received a remake a few years back, proving once again how much interest there was still in it. It's a third-person perspective story-driven action-adventure game that's mechanically similar to Grand Theft Auto 3, with a difference of it being set in a fictional city of Lost Haven, modeled after New York and Chicago, and in the 1930s Prohibition era of US history. So you know, fun times. Other than that, city traversal, both on foot and in cars, how weapons work, how you interact with the world, and mission-based plot progression is almost identical to Rockstar's classic. In fact, the origin story, while nowhere near similar to GTA 3, has a very alike vibe to it. You know, of your character having been dragged by circumstances into a life of crime, and not only finding his way of living in it, but also quite surprisingly thriving. You're playing as Tommy Angelo, an ordinary taxi driver by day and a heartbreaker with stellar hairline by night. He makes his living delivering passengers and spends money on girls, booze and expensive cigars. His life is anything but action-packed, and he goes through it day by day, never really expecting anything special to occur. Well, other than those girls, booze and cigars. Until one of those days, that is. When two men jump in his cab, tell him to drive as fast as he can, just to leave him in a position of not only being chased by a car full of angry mobsters, but also actively fired upon. Now, this is not something anyone would want to happen to them, and Tommy is no different. But given how crafty of a driver he was, how stupid Cole would have been to stop then and there, and how well he knew the city, he got his passengers to safety and in a record time. Well, that last bit is for the fluff purpose here only, as there was no one there with a stopwatch monitoring how long it took him. Impressed with Tommy's uncanny driving skills, the two men offer him a job in the Mafia. Initially he's not into it at all, as you know, not only it's rather dangerous, but also hours are quite fluid, and you just never know when you may be called in and what for. But as his cab is destroyed by two rival Mafia family gangsters the following day, Tommy takes it personally. I mean, all he has in his life is his job, his ladies of the night, and that beautiful stylish cab, which at the time was neither beautiful nor stylish and most definitely not capable of driving anyone anywhere anymore. So upset, angry and a little bit curious, Tommy decides to take the offer the two gentlemen from the previous night gave him and joins the Salieri family, and that's how our game begins. While I wouldn't say that Mafia's story was of Mario Puzo's writing quality, it was still heads and shoulders above what was in most games on the market, and that, complemented by a stellar presentation, made it an excellent title that was and is one of the most fun games ever made. Well, provided you care for the mob team of it and a lot of shooting and driving. The first Soldier of Fortune game was one of the most brutal, bloody and also fun FPS games of its time. It had a decent, even if not great story, but where it mattered, so gameplay, it sure as hell delivered. It pulled no punches, it didn't try to censor anything, and served as a game that was as action-packed as it was gruesome, because dismemberments were pretty strong with that one. And Soldier of Fortune 2 Double Helix is no different. There is an obvious bump up in the quality department, with it now running on Quake 3 Arena's engine and offering models with 36 unique damage zones each and 16 dismemberment points. What does it mean for an average gamer though? Well, it means that if you shoot someone in the shin, ass or his big toe, the damage should be visible on that part of their body and not just a general location, and also that if you're a surgeon with your shotgun, the limbs will fly far and wide and you'll be tripping over all the countless disconnected fingers covering the floor. I may be exaggerating a bit, but even if I am, it's just by a little. It may all feel like a bit too much, and I get that. I mean, all the blood, wounds and limbs are really not necessary for it to work as a game, but they were also not necessary in Mortal Kombat, and it was so gosh darn popular. It's the same case with Soldier of Fortune 2. Without all that, it's just a decent game and one to let some steam off with. But with it included, it's Soldier of freaking Fortune 2, and that's how most of us remember it. Oh, and the enemy AI is no slouch this time, as not only they will try to hide behind covers or encircle you, but also when they have their guns shot out of their hands, they'll reach for their sidearm, and when they'll run out of ammo for that too, they may even look for a gun on the floor to pick up and use. It doesn't seem like much, but actually makes a huge difference when playing. Now, the story. Well, sadly it's not great. It's something about you being a jack-of-all-trades mercenary and fighting against a terrorist organization that's threatening to release a deadly Gemini virus on the world. It's a bit flat and doesn't get much better along the way, but the gameplay carries it all, and Soldier of Fortune 2 is still worth a playthrough. Aftershock is probably the worst looking game that you've seen for quite some time and also the most charming one. The simplicity of its presentation makes it equally as appealing as off-putting, and how you feel about it is something very personal. Me? Well, I think it's terrible, and I love it. The music is considerably better, though still not great, and because of that I'm a bit disappointed with it, as it's not so bad to be amazing, but not good enough to be anything I'll hum, whistle or carry on with me as my in-head live soundtrack for a week or two. On a side note, do you guys get those too? In-head soundtracks for your life that play out when life goes on for a while, just to have them disappear a day or two later, just like that, for no reason. Make sure to let me know in the comments below, or telepathically, that works too. To initiate the mental link, you gotta press that bell icon under the video, trust me. Anyway, with all that out of the way, we've got a game left to talk about, and it's surprisingly good. I mean, this video series mostly covers commercial games, and yet, with this one I decided to go the freeware route. And I don't usually do it unless there's something really special about a particular game. And there is. It's a post-apocalyptic, point-and-click humorous adventure. It's not a Monkey Island type of a humor though, it's something more akin to what you're likely to find in an episode of South Park, so silly, sometimes downright stupid, and nearly always upsetting some kind of minority, or based on a racial, sexual, or cultural stereotypes. If you can't suspend political correctness for a minute to laugh at the silliness that it is based on, it's not gonna be a game for you, and you should definitely skip it. But if you're capable of mentally understanding the difference between an entertainment medium like a video game and your real worldview and opinions, and you know that they don't have to reflect each other at all, you may actually find Aftershock quite amusing. Really, really, really stupid, but also fun. Aftershock is set in a distant, dark and terrible far-off future of 2003. Yup, the year that the Earth stood still. Nope, wrong script, sorry. Let's try again. The year that nothing of note happened, other than the little thing that we like to call the end of all. Even an incredibly unphotogenic dictator going by the name of Hitler, Adolf Hitler, launched a series of nuclear missiles, destroying most major cities in the world, and leaving it in a state of burnt toast. So hot, charred and unattractive. Only 2 cities prevailed, and one of them is Scabsborough, a once beautiful town that's now possibly the most beautiful one in the world, which is not that tough given that there are only 2 left. How it avoided destruction? No one knows, but Hitler's not one to leave things unfinished, so playing as Jimmy, a brother of Bimmy, I wonder if any of you will get the reference. You have to find a way to stop the Hitler from destroying Scabsborough and its surviving sister city of Utopiaville, known for its water parks, jumbo hot dogs and stupid name. So, if you want a game that takes jabs at everything and everyone, even itself, and is also fun and uniquely looking, play Monkey Island. But if that's not an option, I suppose Aftershock will do too. Jeff Crammond was well known for his revolutionary refs on C64 and then Grand Prix games on Amiga and PC, and Grand Prix 4 is another of his excellent releases. It may be more of an evolution rather than revolution, but since all the previous games in the series were rather great, this one builds on what they established and ends up being as good of a title, if you're into F1 simulations that is. The game is naturally based on the 2001 F1 season and features all 22 drivers, 11 teams and 17 courses from that year. What's more, it even recreated real weather conditions from particular races, so if you'd like to change a result you've seen and not liked, it's not outside the scope of possibility. The graphics and AI have been considerably improved since the previous entry, and the computer-controlled drivers now really try to fight for the spots and will actively seek ways to prevent you from grabbing any. It's a pleasure to watch in action and even more pleasure to finally overcome them and leave them behind. The fine-tuning of stuff like brake balance, gear ratio, swing and ride height, dampers, suspension and so on is naturally back and better than ever, and the damage model is really good too. I mean, if you're as good of a driver as myself, you'll see wing steer of your bolide, parts flying all over, and wheels disconnecting and carrying on rolling long after you've stopped on a wall somewhere. It's great. So, one might think that nothing had changed since the earlier entries and that GP4 was still hands down the best F1 game when it released, but it was not the case really. I mean, in terms of AI, tuning and realism it was, but other titles like F1 2002 were a very solid gameplay-wise and better looking competition, and it kinda explains why Grand Prix 4 was the last F1 game Jeff Crammond worked on. Archangel is a third-person action-adventure title that mixes fantasy and sci-fi themes in equal measures, creating a very unique and one-of-a-kind gaming experience. While on the first glance it may appear Archangel is your typical third-person action game with all the running around and sword slashing, but it's not all that. Because early in the game you'll met by a powerful mythical and godlike being known as the Lord of Light, who'll give you a choice of one of 2 paths to follow. Either a powerful warrior or a ghost-like being, so a warrior and thief/rogue respectively. The choice is permanent and stays with you throughout your entire adventure, offering not only different skills and abilities but also shaping the entire gameplay loop. so it may be worth playing through Archangel twice to experience everything that it has to offer. Not necessarily in a row, but it's worth to keep in mind that these two playthroughs would differ considerably. The game is split into 3 chapters set in different time periods from medieval to future, and along your adventure you'll get to find and use different weapons and acquire new skills, magical or otherwise. You use your spirit energy to power spells and magical weapons. Essence points are awarded for killing enemies and can be used to either upgrade current or purchase new spells. And there's quite a few of these, mostly support like shields, invisibility and healing. Since Archangel was dipped a little in RPG 2, along your main mission that we'll talk about soon, there are also a lot of additional, smaller side quests in the game, and the NPCs that you get to meet and interact with all seem believable, having their own daily scheduling and acting as if they could have lived their lives, even if you were not there to witness. You play as Michael Travinsky and you're driving in your car to, well, I don't really know where, to do your shopping, to church, or to place your vote in the elections, whatever. Point is, you're speeding along a bendy road until you're not anymore. And when you wake up it appears as if you were in a car crash and somehow found yourself lying on a cold stone floor of an ancient monastery. As you gather your bearings, you are approached by a monk from an unknown to you yet order, who, while incapable of telling you anything about who you are and how you got there, already have quite big plans for your soon-to-be future. A future in which you'll not only visit 3 different realms, so Middle Ages, the year 2039 and the Realm of Darkness, which funny enough the devs decided to make something else and not my work office, despite it being it, but you'll get to decide the fate of humanity, which is a responsibility unlike any, but if not you, then who else is better to do so? Whenever I talk about Star Trek games that are not RTSs, I make it my point to remind you why I love it. And it's the general idea of us in the future not being from specific countries, but just Earthlings and a part of bigger something, United Federation of Planets. I love the idea of humans eventually growing up to be able to live with others in peace and not constantly seeking power or wealth above all. And Star Trek Bridge Commander is probably the best Star Trek game ever made, if you don't mind it not tackling any away missions at all. I mean, it is called Bridge Commander, so it's hard to fault it for that. What is it all about then, other than warming up of seats of the titular bridge, that is, you may wonder? Well, it's probably the only chance you'll ever get not only to step on a bridge of a Federation ship, but also command one. And you can do it in 2 ways. Either by issuing commands to your bridge crew in first-person view, or by controlling the ship directly in third-person behind the ship camera. While the game is not only about combat, and it should not be a surprise as Star Trek is not about that at all, it plays a huge role in Bridge Commander, and you'll see a lot of enemy ships in various stages of destruction. Caused by you naturally, as you're the best Federation tactician that there ever was. Yes, you. So since we're on the combat, a few things have to be mentioned. First of all, ship models, which are all fantastic, very detailed and looking exactly like you'd expect them to, especially if you're a fan of the Next Generation series, as that's more or less when the game is set. Secondly, the weapons and damage. While the effects are a mixed bag, some look and sound better than the others, all are very similar to what we're used to from TV and can be used with a near-perfect accuracy, meaning that the damage model allows, with a bit of patience and skill that is, to not only target particular parts of the enemy ships like nacelles, warp drive weapons and whatnot, but also even cut out particular parts of the ships off. It takes time, but is doable. And finally, the power allocation to different systems works exactly like you expect it to, so you'll be juggling it throughout all the battles, switching between engines, shields, weapons and so on, all the while repairing what's been damaged and aiming for the crucial systems on the opponent's vessel. It's super fun. And now for the story. A sudden and unexpected explosion of a star that went nova wipes half of the Vesuvius system, killing your former captain too. Since you're highest ranking officer though, that means a fast promotion and you're given his command and are assigned with investigating the mysterious explosion and its source in the region of space known as Maelstrom. While this setup may sound simple and rather flat at first glance, it's anything but, and as you progress through 8 episodes Bridge Commander is split into, it will gradually build upon, revealing more and more interesting details about an overarching plot and putting you in the position of being the only one capable of solving this space puzzle. Other than the combat big and small, you'll also have missions of exploration, ferrying of supplies or helping other ships and colonies. Other than the older point-and-click adventures, and I mean those from the early 90s and not the later stuff, Bridge Commander is probably the best and most true to life, or true to fiction actually, Star Trek game ever made. And if you're a fan, you should definitely try it out. Oh, and there are literally hundreds if not thousands of mods for it online, adding countless ships, better graphics and special effects. It's basically infinitely replayable. Project Nomads is such an unusual mixture of ideas that it truly was a nomad on a video gaming landscape of 2002, for better or worse. Well, worse in this case, but we'll get there soon enough. It tried mixing action shooting with third-person perspective strategy similar to that of Sacrifice, and all of that built around the concept of islands floating in the skies, similar to 1997's Netstorm. And it failed. Well, at least it failed at becoming something big and noteworthy, because as a game, it does technically work and can be fun for short bursts from time to time. Holding your attention for longer, though, is not something that I would bet any money on. Especially that most extra that it does so superficially and ends up just being an average, very generic third-person action shooter. Which is not a bad thing at all, just not what it aimed to do. The island is your home, your base, and you have to defend it. So you'll be erecting buildings that generate the energy, which is your main resource, those that build bombers and fighters that you can jump into and fly around killing stuff, and turrets that can be used to gun down oncoming enemies. And while the turrets can operate quite well autonomously protecting your island, the AI for planes straight up suck, and you're better off jumping in and piloting this yourself. And while not all missions that you'll partake in are the same, with some of them trying to do something new and unexpected, with different results I must add, most that you'll do is run around and shoot stuff. Which is not bad if you like shooters, but the variety is not Project Nomad's strongest suit, and the repetition may and will settle in fast. The enemies are all giant insects that for whatever the reason chose your island as their target, and all you'll be doing is debugging the island, pun intended, and slowly getting more and more tired with the gameplay loop. Project Nomad's story is about exploring these floating islands and discovering the secrets of a mysterious and long-dead race of the so-called Master Builders. You know, first recorded Minecraft YouTubers who've created the most impressive worlds ever. But it's so random and the missions feel so disconnected that I can't fathom for the life of me the general idea behind it. And whether it's explained better later on or not, I will never know, as I've never completed the game and don't plan on doing it anytime soon. It's just not worth my time, I feel. Soldiers of Anarchy is often forgotten or ignored, but actually pretty good squad-based real-time strategy. And one that's not just a series of random missions, but has an overarching and post-apocalyptic themed plot too. So, in the fictional quote-unquote future of 2015, 10 years after deadly man-made virus killed billions across the planet, 4 soldiers leave the bunker they've spent this entire time in, waiting for the right and safe time to emerge. And while the right time was then and there, it seemed that the safe one would never happen, as the outside world is devastated, barren and split into territories controlled by always warring with each other gangs. Sporadic groups of survivors that are not associated with these groups are all self-sustaining and spread far and wide, surviving mainly on scavenging. Your mission, even if unknown to you at first, is to try to find a way to eventually restore order and civilization. While Soldiers of Anarchy is definitely an RTS, it's more similar to titles like Company of Heroes rather than Command & Conquer. You have a team of soldiers which will eventually grow in number, and you lead them through a series of story-based missions, completely disregarding any base building or resource gathering. These soldiers start with very basic armament, but as you progress, you'll find and gain access to many different weapons and pieces of gear, and will be able to even customize loadouts for your squad before each mission, which is a nice and welcome addition. Missions have their own unique plot-related objectives, and while these don't change on consecutive playthroughs, additional secondary tasks can be unlocked during some missions, adding a lot to the replayability. As your soldiers survive more and more encounters, they may improve their combat and support skills, becoming more valuable to your team and potential future success of the entire campaign. There are vehicles in Soldiers of Anarchy too, and they are commanded, equipped and upgraded in the same way your soldiers are, but they require you to assign your troops to be able to use them. And more often than not, you should, as those APCs, tanks, helicopters and fighter planes can often decide whether a particular mission will end in a favorable way. I don't say it often about RTSs, but the plot is truly a highlight of this one. It may be a personal thing, as I'm a sucker for all things post-apo, even if I would never want to see the world after such an event in real life, but it's worth mentioning that the story never feels flat, and the graphics complementing it add a lot of flavor too. All in all, other than the lack of a simple-to-implement option of issuing commands when the game is paused, Soldiers of Anarchy don't disappoint and will provide a lot of fun if you give it a chance. The world drowns in a bottomless sea of chaos. The monsters run rampart, the evil spreads, and people are afraid to leave their houses. And it all started years back, when a black rift appeared seemingly out of nowhere, tore the sky in half, and vomited out millions of monsters that quickly overran the world, effectively reversing our progress, leaving us in what feels like near medieval times of technology. The rift was named the Black Abyss, and within days, all of the world's armies were either disbanded or destroyed, and the population was largely decimated. As the dust settled and the monsters spread more and more, appearing less concentrated and more spread apart, the survivors huddled together, founding small towns and settlements. And because the technological advancements failed to save us, we've once again turned to mystical, and the newfound magic emerged, serving as the literal and proverbial beacon of light in these dark times. The game starts with you playing as a mercenary for hire and arriving in a small town that's long lost any hope. Shadowflare Episode 1 is the first out of 4 episodes of a shareware action RPG, not unlike and more popular Diablo and Diablo 2. In fact, it's more than obvious that it was the Diablos that were the inspirations for Shadowflare. But as an alternative, or a new title for those who completed both Diablos previously, it actually works quite fine. While it follows the typical for the genre gameplay formula of defeating increasingly larger in numbers and strength group of monsters to help the settlement you found yourself in, it does few things differently than the progenitor of the genre. So as you start the game you're a mercenary and you don't start by picking another class, and instead do it after a little while of playing. 5 or 6 levels to be precise, and it kinda feels like a natural progression of how you've been playing all along, rather than a choice. It can be a warrior, wizard/witch, and a hunter. You also don't begin your adventure alone, but with an animal companion that is actually really useful. It can collect items from your fallen enemies, it can activate switches to open doors, and it can even help you in combat. It has 2 states between which you can toggle, active and inactive. In first, it will do everything I just told you about, and it's one that you lose most of the time. When it's inactive though, it's in its emotional support mode, in which all that it does is look hella cute, following you around entirely immune to any damage, healing itself over time, and being there just so that you would not feel alone. The animal naturally gains levels, same as you do, but at a slower pace, and with time acquires stronger attacks too. Oh, and if you're a heartless monster, someone who would abandon their pet in the middle of the woods somewhere, then yeah, for 1, F you, and for 2, you can get a completely different one in each town. The entire gameplay is quest-based, meaning that same as in Diablo, you receive a quest, follow through by either defeating a particular group of monsters, or going somewhere and clearing it of monsters, or hunting a particular monster, or I think you get the gist of it. There's a lot of monsters everywhere, and you have to remove them from this plane of existence. While Shadowflare takes place in the post-apocalyptic future, there are no gunpowder weapons or grenades, despite there being laser turrets in the game and even teleportation. It's an odd choice and takes you a bit out of experience, but it's not big enough of an issue to detract you from playing. What can though, is the fact that the faster you click the mouse, the faster your character attacks. And while you may think that it's obvious, because how else would that work, I disagree. I feel that the mouse holding should already offer you the fastest possible attack, and your focus should be on correct rotation of skills and spells rather than on the mashing. That's me though, and you may not share the sentiment. All in all, Shadowflare, while not being the same quality level as Diablo, is still rather fun and definitely worth a playthrough if you're a fan of the genre. No One Lives Forever 2, A Spy in Harm's Way, which I will abbreviate as NOLF2 or MILF2, I haven't made my mind yet, is a first-person 1960s spy-themed shooter and a follow-up to the first game. It takes place exactly a year after the events of the first title, and once again follows Kate Archer during the time when tensions between United States and Soviet Union over a small but strategically important island of Chios are heating up. Kate is still working for the Unity, an organization whose goal is to prevent international conflicts, and especially those that could result in a global war. So, Unity sends her to Japan to attend, and I shit you not here, International Crime Convention to learn more about what's happening. There, she meets another Unity agent who gives her her first assignment, which will begin a snowball of missions that will take Kate all around the world and allow her to solve this rather difficult political situation. Sometimes quietly, sometimes not so much, but usually leaving a trail of warm bodies behind. She will visit Siberia, Ohio, Antarctica and India among others, and each of the missions she'll partake in will have their own unique and fun to complete objectives. Most of them can be fulfilled in either stealth or by guns blazing approach, or if you're feeling adventurous, or are like me and can't decide on one, a mixture of both. Either way, all the missions are rather open-ended, allow for taking them on in numerous different ways, and not all objectives needs to be completed for the plot to carry on, which is a rather fresh and more realistic approach, cause you can't be expecting that all your spy missions will always be successes. That sounds really weird when talking about NOLF 2, because if you remember the first game, you probably also do that it was rather humorous, full of jokes and often funny situations title, despite the theoretically serious plot. And the second one is no different. Still, if you love the original, you'll love this one too, as it's as good, if not better. Now, when talking about a spy game, one can't just ignore all the tools of the trade. So blowtorches disguised as hairspray, bombs hidden in robotic cuts, or lipstick mini-explosives among others. Fun stuff, and it's equally as fun to use, and if you decide to give NOLF 2 a chance, you'll have a blast. Emergency 2, The Ultimate Fight for Life, is an isometric top-down strategy in which you're controlling cities' emergency units in response to many different life-threatening emergencies. You are given a full access to fire, rescue and police vehicles, and also a tow truck too. So you know, every 4-year-old boy's dream scenario, short of those terrible emergencies naturally. Each mission starts with an overview of the situation, highlighting what and where happened, and then you evaluate what you know and start dealing with the situation from the control room. And since there are literally dozens of different scenarios to deal with, from a person trapped in a car on the train tracks, through a traffic accident, sinking old tanker, or even a volcanic eruption, you'll need to familiarize yourself with how each of the units work, and what you can and cannot do with them, and best strategies to approach each and every situation. Especially that while you're sending different units to the emergency site, when they get there, you'll need to coordinate and lead all of them individually, making sure that they're performing as best as is possible. And it's actually very crucial, as not only each of the missions has a budget which you cannot exceed, but they're also very often timed, and what's more, many of the actions that you can take require a quick response, like sending police to secure a crash site and redirect traffic to prevent future accidents, or having the helicopter pick up accident victims to the hospital ASAP before they kick the bucket. It's a game that teaches you how to optimize, balance things, and act quick and smart. It's obviously clear that Emergency 2 is not a game for everyone. It definitely isn't, but if anything I just said sounds even remotely interesting to you, then I would most definitely recommend you check it out, as it's a very well thought out and fun playing title. Serious Sam the Second Encounter is, well, second game in the long-running series of crazy over-the-top first-person shooters, and equally as mad of a game as the one before. Given that it's a follow-up to the original, a lot of things have been improved and expanded upon, short of maybe gameplay formula, which remained action-packed romp in which you fight off hundreds if not thousands of enemies coming at you from all directions at all times. Second Encounter adds 7 new types of enemies and 3 new weapons of chainsaw, flamethrower and a scoped rifle. There are also some dynamic environments in the game, which add a lot of variety and make all the running and gunning all the more fun. I mean, who wouldn't want to fight countless monstrosities in a room in which the gravity is multi-directional or on a nice covered floor? It's pretty cool, I tell you. The second encounter starts directly after the first game, with Sam's ship going off for the Cyrus, or well, attempting to do so. But when it collides with a civilian ship soon after liftoff, start, launch, or however else you'd call it for a spaceship, it falls back to Earth, crash landing in the Sierra Madre de Chiapas near the Mayan city of Palenque. To be able to escape once again unfriendly to him territory, Sam must now find and recover a backup Syrian ship, which is apparently hidden somewhere on Earth. Well, somewhere and sometime, as it's definitely not in the same time period. Where and where then? Who knows? Well, whomever played the game does, but all I'll tell you here is that there are 3 unique time periods and locations you'll be playing at, and one of them is a medieval town in Poland, which you know, to me at least, is kinda fun. So if you don't care about any death in your games, and are just looking for a fast and explosive shooter, preferably one to use to let some steam off after a hard day's work, then there was hardly anything better in 2002. In Darkfall the Journal you play as Mr. Crowhurst. Yup, no first name. Why? I don't know, but you're probably some kind of a cold child, raised in a logged community and called something odd, like a screwdriver, doormat, or maybe a summer breeze or something. In the worst case, it may even be something offensive, like a wet fart or stinky. The point is, you have no name, and we just gotta roll with it and not let our, well, my imagination wander. The game starts with your brother calling you out of the blue and urging you to meet him in the town of Dorset in a Hotel Dowerton, as while he was working there with 2 ghost hunters, something odd had happened, and now the hunters have seemingly become the huntees, and he feels that he may be the one too. And while it's a tad weird phone call to receive out of the blue, the voice on the other end seems seriously disturbed and troubled, so you decide to meet with your brother. Upon arrival, it appears that not only the hotel's really been haunted by the spirits of people who vanished in it in 1947, but that your brother is also gone. And this is where the game truly begins, with a disappearance, mystery and a whole lot of walking and clicking. Darkfall is the first-person point-and-click horror/psychological adventure in which you have to solve the mystery of disappearances of your brother and numerous other people who just poofed out of existence, leaving the obvious reason where to and why. Like that stink on the metro train that attacks your nostrils aggressively and unexpectedly, just to go away a second later as if nothing was ever there. The gameplay comprises of exploration of many pre-rendered locations, finding notes, diaries and clues left behind by those who are gone, and a lot of puzzle solving. And these come as riddles, encrypted messages and mechanisms you'll have to figure out. It's worth pointing out that all the notes, journals or whatever else that you'll find are not recorded anywhere, and you either have to remember all the details or make actual real-life notes that will help you solve this unnatural case. Darkfall may not be the best mystery adventure game out there, especially that it uses pre-rendered graphics, and I'm mentally allergic to those, as in I get brushes on my brain when I see them, and they really itch. But it's a well put together title with an interesting plot that most fans of the genre would no doubt enjoy. I am of the firm belief that among many RPG developers on the PC market, Obsidian Entertainment is the best. I mean, there are few great, some good, and few decent devs out there, but there's only one best. And it's them. I mean, Knights of the Old Republic 2, both Neverwinter Nights games in varying degrees, also Fallout New Vegas, that's more than obvious, both Pillars of Eternity titles, The Outer Worlds, and countless other classics when they were still within Black Isle Studios. No one can craft as engaging narrative, as deep and meaningful choices, and as freedom-oriented game as they can. And while they work with BioWare on Neverwinter Nights, arguably another excellent at the time developer, their influence and touch is clearly visible in that title too. But let's not talk about milking the cow and just grab the bucket and get to work. Neverwinter Nights is a real-time role-playing based on the 3rd edition of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons rule set and using a full 3D top-down engine with rotation. Perhaps it's nothing special today, but back then it was really immersive. And especially that same as Baldur's Gate, the action could be paused at any time to issue orders, to examine the situation, and to zoom in for some of those sweet combat close-ups. You know, with Goblin's head flying off his neck or a sword cutting a troll in half. Or well, for any number of other reasons. Unlike Baldur's Gate though, in Neverwinter Nights, while you may have other characters join your party, you only ever really control your main one, and it's the one that you can issue orders to that has his own inventory and levels up. Others just follow yours, smell nice, and do whatever the hell they please. Well, truth be told, sometimes they don't smell that great. Anyway, the story of the main campaign of Neverwinter focuses on deadly plague known as the Wailing Death, that is decimating the population of the city. While the disease is terrible and dangerous, there is a cure. Or, well, there can be a cure if all the ingredients for it are collected and delivered in a timely manner. And since they come from 4 different monsters, you have to team up with Fentic Moss and his friend Dester to capture them. The monsters, not the 2 dudes. As our 3 heroes go about that, risking their lives, limbs, dinner and whatnot, they are attacked by mysterious assassins hired by an evil cult that's responsible for the poisonous illness. And that's, my dear viewers, how this larger-than-life campaign sets off. It's a decent story, and one worth completing, but it's not what made Neverwinter Nights such an amazing, beloved and timeless title. Not even close. It was actually incredible multiplayer mode in which each of the gamers plays as just one character, and one of them takes the role of a dungeon master, controlling the adventure, monsters, traps, and the rules governing it all too. Virtually making Neverwinter Nights the closest equivalent to a real tabletop RPG that there ever was. And no, I'm not exaggerating, it was that good. Also, the addition of a map, scripted events, cutscenes, conversations, and adventures editor made Neverwinter Nights basically infinitely replayable title. Arx Fatalis is what happens when you eat something that's not good anymore and then have to spend the rest of the day on the throne, begging the death to take you as you just can't stand the pain and suffering anymore. I think. Because the one that we're going to talk about today is actually a first-person perspective role-playing set near entirely in a vast and mysterious underground world. The subsurface kingdom is built out of 8 huge levels that comprise of populated settlements with shops and the likes, and tons upon tons of more or less dangerous areas where you'll be fighting for your own life. While unlocking of new areas in Arx Fatalis may require completion of certain quests in particular order, when you do have them available, you can pretty much explore them in any direction and order you'd like, making the game a rather open-world fare. Well, at least as much as it can be open, dozens of meters / feet under the surface. There are many different builds, focusing on melee, ranged, magic or stealth available, and most if not all non-story combat encounters can actually be avoided if you really put your mind to it. Both magic and melee combat are very strategic, with first being based off runes, which you need to draw with a mouse to cast them, and second offering different directional types of attacks. It's a fun, even if a bit clunky solution for both, but also something hardly any other games did. Arx Fatalis is one of the very few games to this day that allow for complete and unhindered killing of all the characters that you meet in it. Good or bad, NPC or not, if they're there and you really want to, and are good enough to do it, you can actually off them all. The story is something about Arx Fatalis once being an underground town built by all kinds of creatures, be it humans, dwarves, trolls, goblins, you name it, and populated by them living together in peace. Well, for a while at least, as resource scarcity, lack of access to stuff like sunlight and poor ventilation around public toilets eventually proved too much for them all to handle, and the unrest and conflicts ensued, turning sparks of animosity into a full-on raging fire of hate. You start the game by waking up in a cell with a bump on your head and no recollection of who, where and why you are, and an entire adventure ahead of you. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Arx Fatalis. I wonder if you'd be cool with me saying that Disciples to Dark Prophecy is just a follow-up to the first game and a shameless Heroes of Might and Magic clone. I wonder, but I won't ask, and also one of these sentences is incorrect. because while it's clear what the series are based on, they do their own thing too, making this entire affair feel fresh and fun and not like a burger that's been microwave reheated for the 7th time 3rd day in a row. The general gameplay idea is very similar, nay, near identical really, so you have the heroes, the armies and towns, and you explore the overworld map, all the while taking all the combat encounters on separate strategic screens. Bada beep bada boom, that's Heroes folks, and that's Disciples too. The way the cities and capital expansion works is quite different though, with the first only being upgraded in level and offering you various different bonuses, while the other being comprised of numerous important buildings and creature dwellings. Each of the types of heroes that you can lead also have different influence on the capital and your gameplay, and while all of these are perhaps not revolutions but more like evolutions, they're definitely worth a try. Interestingly enough, Disciples 2's storyline is told through campaign of all 4 available races of humans, mountain clans, Legion of the Damned and the Undead Hordes. And only after completing all 4 of these, you'll know what, why and how really happened, and will have a full grasp on an overarching plot. It's perhaps not a new concept being previously used in Blizzard's StarCraft, but it's a fun approach to storytelling and one that sort of makes you go through all the content that the game has to offer to understand why its world is the way that it is. Mutant Storm is like Robotron, Asteroids and Geometry Wars all rolled into one and served over a spread of tiny, super fast 89 levels of pure arcade fun. And yes, there's really that many of them, and yes again, they are really that much fun, if you like those classic experiences that is. The idea here is rather basic, so much so in fact that it could be called simplistic. You're a ship in the middle of the screen in differently shaped levels filled with bodies, enemies, which for whatever the reason are supposed to be those titular mutants, and you have to kill them all. Yup, that's pretty much it. When they're all gone, ding ding ding, and you're off to the next stage, rinse and repeat and have great fun. It's a micro twin stick shooter after all, and while the experiences of each stages are quite micro too, the fun that you'll be having playing through it all is anything but petite. The enemies are quite varied in how they look, but they only ever differ really in how they act. Whether they try to charge at you and kill you by colliding with your ship, or if they shoot. Well, sometimes both, but sometimes I feel happy and not my usual scared or confused, so let's not talk about sometimes here. A pretty cool feature of Mutant Storm is that it adapts its gameplay to how good you do. So, the better you are at spreading Eternal Z's through hordes of evil mutants, the more demanding the game will get, and the more you suck, the less it will throw at you at once. It makes the Mutant Storm feel more dynamic, and provides a challenge while never really overwhelming you with it all. There are naturally power-ups you can pick up from defeated enemies too, and these either make your weapons stronger, give you shield for protection, or plaster your ship with missile launchers, which are always fun to have. Mutant Storm originated on Xbox Live Arcade, which makes it a small, indie-like game in its design and one that has more substance than fluff, meaning that it's all gameplay and nearly no story. Oh, and if you decide to give it a go, make sure to have a gamepad ready, as on mouse and keyboard it's just unnecessarily difficult and uncomfortable to control. I remember Gaming Max praising Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2 and people talking about it as if it was the next big thing. I also remember feeling really underwhelmed by it, and like it was a sign of the series slowly going down the drain, which is not a fair statement perhaps, but also not wrong either, from where I was sitting, as I was not a fan of the previous entry either. I believe that released a little while later, Need for Speed Underground truly resurrected the franchise and made it great again. Oh my god, I gotta be careful with these terrible statements. Anyway, Hot Pursuit 2 was not it, and I was not having much fun with it. Well, at least not a lot of it and not often, as I did had some. There are tons of new tracks and vehicles, both unlocked by competing in races, and you still have to run away from cops when they chase you, with the difference being that they don't issue tickets anymore and end your race if they catch you. It's a bit annoying, but also not too big of an issue if you're at least an average video gaming racing driver. The graphics have been lifted a bit too, looking more modern and fresh. And the events that were previously found in a rather fun Porsche Unleashed offshoot of the series are present in Hot Pursuit 2, and a nice touch to round this objectively speaking decent package of a game. What I did not enjoy about it though were two things. First of all, how floaty the driving felt and how not fun it made the game from time to time. It's not a constant feeling, but when it sets in, you just can't overlook it and have to resort to palette cleaning with another game. And for 2, Hot Pursuit 2 didn't felt like it. Like 2, I mean. It was more like 1.3 alpha at best, and like an iterative addition rather than the new game. That's me though, and you don't have to agree. I mean, its Moby Games score proves that people did love it in fact, so I imagine I may be in the vocal minority here. Either way, it's an important release for 2002 and a title that I couldn't just skip, even if it was one I cared very little for. Have you ever wondered how it would be to train, catch and battle Pokémon, but control them during those battles directly and not just issue commands? And also, if instead of Pokémon they could be something else, elephants, aliens, or better yet, maybe fairies? Well, me neither. But whether you were curious about it or not, this is what Zanzarah the Hidden Portal is all about. You're a fairy master and you catch, train and fight fairies. The combat plays out in first-person mode and is action-based, and you can fly, jump and cast spells and, well, that's pretty much it. It may not be the deepest thing ever, but it's surprisingly not that bad. The combat, that is. All the fairies have their own elements and these work on a sort of rock-paper-scissors mechanic. So the water fairy will be strong against the fire one, and the wind will be strong against water, and so on. Point is, each of them have one that they're strong against and one that they're at a disadvantage when fighting. You can carry up to 5 of these fairies with you at the time in their, and I shit you not here, fairy balls, and they can be summoned and switched between during combat at any time. When a fairy wins, you may find spoils in the form of either fairy coins or different items. Surviving creatures earn experience and eventually level up, increasing their attributes and sometimes getting new spells too. When an opposing fairy is weakened, be it a random one met in the world or one used by another fairy trainer against you, you can throw your fairy balls at it to try to catch it. You know, like in that other game from a popular developer/distributor that Zanzarah is clearly based on. Unlike Pokémon though, Zanzarah's fairies are not counted in hundreds and there are only 77 unique ones, split over 10 different elements. Also, if you're at all familiar with Pokémon, worry not, cause fairies too can evolve into stronger ones by either reaching a particular level or by being combined with specific items. Fun. It may seem like I'm dropping solid and heavy bricks on Zanzarah comparing it to a bigger and more well-known game, but it's actually pretty fun and unique for a PC game and definitely worth trying out if you like Nintendo's original and enjoy light-hearted RPGs. I just realized that I've not said anything about the story yet, so let me fix that. The game starts with a series of crimes. First of all, you play as Amy, and an uninvited stranger enters your house when you're not looking. So you know, that's breaking and entering. Then it's behind a casket in which it places a mysterious rune, or candy, it's hard to tell from afar what it is, and that's planting of evidence, I think. And when you touch it, you get magically transported to Zanzarah, a fantasy land where you learn that you are prophesied future fairy master trainer that will save the entire kingdom. And that is kidnapping. So yeah, that's what the game is all about. Little Fighter 2 is great. I should really end it here and just carry on with the next game, but I just can't. Because I do want to tell you about it. It's a beat-em-up and fighter mixture with cute characters. I wanted to say chibi characters, but I'm not sure if it's correct phrasing. It offers 3 game modes built in, Versus, in which you can choose up to 8 human or CPU-controlled characters to battle it out against each other, and up to 4 humans can be on one computer, meaning that the large battles require 2 connected PCs. Then there's the Championship mode, which is a series of one-on-one fights in a tournament format, in which loser of each battle is knocked out of the competition. And finally, the main meat, the sizzling steak, the slice of crunchy bacon, and the best and most fun mode of the game, at least in my eyes that is, the Stage mode, which is a side-scrolling beat-em-up. It is also available for 1 to 8 players, and believe me when I tell you that when there's so many of you playing at once, it's a riot. There are a total of 24 different characters to choose from, 11 of whom are initially playable and the rest needs to be unlocked via completion of particular levels on difficult setting in Stage mode gameplay. All of these characters have their own sets of attacks and special moves, their best use case scenarios, and feel entirely different when playing. Some of them excel at melee, others at range or magic use, there's plenty of them is what I'm saying and it's pretty fun to test them all out. It's worth pointing out though, that out of the initial 11, one is a template character. It's rather weak and unimpressive and literally a template upon which all others were made. So it's technically available and playable, it's not a viable choice really. Well, unless you wanna show the others that you outclass them even playing as trash. But that is not a friendly gaming sir, and also not cool. Out of 13 unlockable characters, 4 are bosses that you defeat while playing, and they are rather strong, and the remaining 9 are the common minions that you fight against in the campaign. It is fun to have them, but they're not necessary as they're not great. And finally, third-party downloadable characters are, or at least were also available online, and they can be added to the game too. While the presentation of Little Fighter 2 is rather simple for 2002, in terms of both sounds and graphics, where it matters, so gameplay, it shines and is really fun, especially when you find someone to play it with. Medieval Total War is the second game in by now long-running series of strategies and one spanning from 1087 to 1453 in Europe, North Africa and the Middle East. Same as the original, it splits its gameplay into 2 separate modes of turn-based ground strategy on the province/country level and also super fun time. And what I mean by that is huge real-time tactical combat encounters where you get to lead and observe combat on both armies and individual unit scale. Generally speaking, not unlike in the earlier Shogun, it's all about conquering the map and emerging victorious. And to do so, you'll have to pick one of the available factions and lead them to victory. And these are Almohads, so Iberia and North Africa, the Aragonese, so southern Italy, the Byzantine Empire, the Kingdom of Denmark, the Egyptians, the English, the French, the Holy Roman Empire, the Hungarians, the Italians, the people of Novgorod, so Russia, the Polish, the Spanish, the Sicilians, and the Turkish. Pretty wide selection if you ask me. The few unplayable ones are those that appear throughout the campaign during the time that they did at their historical time, and some smaller and less significant historically groups. Each of the sides has their own territory, religion and armies, but those that share similar cultures may have some overlap in kinds of the core units. Most of the gameplay ideas are retained from the Shogun, so diplomacy and economics are naturally still present in the game, espionage and assassinations are great tools that you can and should use when it best suits your grand strategy, and the religion is super useful in securing loyalty in the provinces that you converted to your beliefs. Taxation of provinces and trade income are your sources of liquidity needed to upgrade your castles, erect buildings and raise armies. And while the specific technology research is impossible, several technological advances become available over time, as they did historically. Each of the characters that you get to lead or use to command your armies is described by a series of attributes which describe their tactical command proficiency and skill in governing of the provinces. They can also have vices and virtues, and these traits are acquired either on random or through your actions over the course of the game. Occasionally, a historically famous character will be trained, such as Richard the Lionheart or Saladin for instance, and these usually have considerably higher attributes and are of much higher importance than the regular ones. What's more, there are also emissaries, spies, assassins, rebellions, heck, there are even holy wars that you can wage on if you're either Catholic or Muslim, and to be clear for the YouTube's sake, I naturally meant within the game. The possibilities are truly huge, and each and every game can and will play out differently. Medieval Total War wasn't perhaps as popular as the original game was, but objectively speaking, it was a much better and expanded title that could easily provide dozens of hours of fun. Remember the video I did about games with product placements? I've naturally missed many, cause it's near impossible to fit them all on all platforms in a one short release, but among the numerous that I've skipped, there was Darkened Sky 2, our today's title. It's a third-person action-adventure game working in conjunction with the Skittles. Yes, the colorful tasty candies that many of us really enjoy. Unlike many other games promoting real-life products, Darkened Sky actually uses Skittles as an integral part of its gameplay mechanics and not only as a collectible or something that replenishes your health or mana or whatever. Skittles are utilized like runes in other games, so as parts of spells that you can cast, meaning that you have to collect and use a certain set of different colored candies to cast particular magic spells. Different colored Skittles mana regenerates over time when used up, but can also be replenished quicker when blue power-ups are picked up. Available spells are split into two groups, non-combat and combat, and the ones you have access to at any given moment are entirely dependent on the quantity of Skittles that you've collected. The selection of spells is rather wide, especially for action-adventure game, and offers protective casts like Firewalking, Protective Field or Floating, as well as attack ones like Fireballs, Lightning and the Light Beams among others. Skittles can also be used to power up your stuff, and it allows you to use it as an energy weapon in melee combat. The story of Darkened Tide is rather simple and focuses on our protagonist Sky. She's a lowly and rather unspectacular shepherdess that gains her newfound powers after chasing one of her stray animals on one of those regular boring days, let's call it a Wednesday. She does so by accidentally coming across magical Skittles. And her, let's say, awakening is right on time it seems, as the evil wizard Nekroth squelched the Great Rainbow, whatever that may be, and it now needs to be recovered and reassembled. Darkened Tide is full of different puzzles that you'll come across and will have to solve for progress, and a lot of cutscenes that will push the plot forward. For the most part, it feels like The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time if it was made on a strict budget and lacked precise direction. Because while it's definitely not a bad game, there is a lot about it that could be made much better. The areas lack interesting locations, the objectives are not always straightforward, and may at times require a little back and forth around the map to figure out. The monsters seems to be charging straight at you, like always, never trying to encircle or trap you, feeling like empty husks with no AI to support them, running for you with no care in the world and no plan of what to do when they eventually reach you. And finally, the controls, at least mouse and keyboard implementation, and how the spells are picked to be used, are not great either. And while the world graphics are not great, Sky's model is actually very nice for the time, and especially its facial animations. The voiceovers are great too, if you manage to hear them over the music. But they're often sarcastic and funny, which makes up for the music being off, because yes, you will turn it off. Overall, Darkened Sky is a decent but also a bit unpolished title that could have been really good if given more development time. As it stands now, it's just an average game at best. Age of Wonders 2: The Wizard's Throne is a fantasy turn-based strategy game and a sequel to the first title. If you look at it not knowing what it is, some obvious similarities to Heroes of Might and Magic may come to mind. That is largely incorrect, however, as it's much closer to Master of Magic than that title. So, it's more of a civilization-like game, albeit in fantasy clothing, than a strategy role-playing. In Age of Wonders 2 you play a role of omnipowerful spellcasting wizard Merlin, residing in his comfy and clean wizard tower, who must fight against other spellcasters to gain control over the different spheres of magic to bring balance back to the world. And each of these spheres corresponds to a different spells that are available to cast and represent different kinds of magic. Some spells can overlap between different spheres, but overall, each of them feel unique and fun to try out. There are also 12 different races that you can rule over, and these comprise of both classic and unusual fantasy species, such as elves, dwarves, humans, draconians, or the undead for instance. And all of them not only look, but also feel entirely unique, offering a very fun and one-of-a-kind gaming experience and different global and tactical strategies. They also differ in the kinds of units that they offer, but that kinda goes without saying. It's worth pointing out though that there are over 100 different units in the game and around 30 champions, that are these super special, much stronger fighters, but also ones that take a lot of time to recruit. To conquer the land, your wizard employs heroes in his stead, and they travel the world map, battling against opposing heroes, capturing castles and different strategically important locations like mines for instance. Tactical combat takes place on 3D isometric maps and is a thing of beauty. All the units nicely animated and the spells look fantastic. Wins in combat encounters naturally bring heroes XP, which in turn allows them to gain levels. Upon level up, they are presented with a choice of 3 available skills and have to pick just one. It's a change from the first game, in which you had a much wider pool of spells to pick from when heroes got better. It's not too big of an issue though, but definitely something veterans of the first game would notice. Spells are split into global and combat-oriented, and the first are cast by a wizard outside of combat and can reach over a distance around his tower and over-amplifying locations like magic relays and heroes. The second are cast directly by heroes who are spellcasters during tactical battles. Over time as you play, you may notice that some of your heroes get really powerful. And it's definitely the case, but keep in mind that same happens to those that belong to your opponents, and you should never treat them as invincible machines of destruction, as there is nearly always one somewhere that's either stronger or better at magic. Age of Wonders 2's campaign is composed out of 6 smaller ones, one for each of the spheres of magic, and all the heroes, their levels, items and skills carry over between them. Since there is a level 30 cap on all heroes, it's much better to farm the levels in the earlier missions in the mini-campaigns, so that the later ones would be easier, rather than going through each mission as fast as possible, as it actually makes the game harder. All in all, while the Age of Wonders 2 is not the easiest of games, it's a really fun one, and especially if you're into fantasy turn-based strategies. Rally Sport Challenge is fantastic, if you like the sport that is. So keep that in mind while we carry on. It was made by Digital Illusions, which you know as DICE today, and they were really good at the game dev at the time. It offers 4 explosive, not literally of course, game modes of hill climb, ice racing, rallycross and traditional rally. It's not a lot, but they're all fun and worth having a go at. Hill climb is naturally exactly as its name stipulates, so you will either speed up or down a dangerous mountain with cliffs and rocks along the track and have to take care about both. The pace at which you're racing to get to the finish line as soon as possible, and also the dangers all around, so finding a balance of speed and safety is a key to success here. Ice racing sees you driving around the track covered with a slick bed of ice for a number of laps. As it's easy to guess, it's rather slippery, so it's another of those balancing act game modes. Rallycross is just that. A cross rally with other drivers racing against you all at the same time, and it's also a race for a number of laps. And finally Rally, so the main mode, which can be played as a career and sees you racing stages from start to finish alone, one by one against time. It may sound like the least action-oriented mode, but if you're a fan of the sport, you know that it's actually the most fun part of the game. There are 29 cars available in Rally Sport Challenge, with only 8 of them to choose from at first game launch, and the remaining 21 unlocked during a career mode via accomplishments. One thing worth mentioning here is the realism, and I gotta say that the way that the cars behave on different surfaces in different conditions and on different parts of the tracks feels super true to life. I mean, I'm no rally driver obviously, as if I would, I'd probably be either racing now or lying in the hospital after my last crash. But I'm a driver and I see nothing wrong with how the cars behave in Rally Sport Challenge. Interestingly enough, same as in real competitions, there are no restarts in the normal difficulty mode, and regardless of the damage that your car sustained, you always have to race to the very end of the track. And since we're on the tracks, they're excellent. Nicely designed, fun and full of hazards, and also surrounded by high-quality roadside objects and greenery. In fact, the presentation overall is of such high quality that I wouldn't complain if I was to play it today. It is perhaps nowhere near the modern standards, but it doesn't look bad or ancient either. Rally Sport is a very fun simulation and one that will no doubt keep you glued to your screen if you're into the sport. If you're not, then I wouldn't dare to guess, as rally races are kinda like Daytona. They're very specific, have certain rules and style, and it's not everyone's cup of tea. It's no Need for Speed or Forza, is what I'm saying here. Star Wars Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast is a first and third person hybrid action game set in everyone's first or second most favorite sci-fi universe. Or third, cause you never know. For me, it's in between the 7th and 10th, but I don't feel like running the mental math now to get the exact spot. I know the top 5 though. Anyway, Jedi Outcast is a direct follow-up to earlier Dark Forces 1 and 2, and also stars Kyle Katarn, a former Jedi and now mercenary working for the New Republic. This time, however, devoid of the Force, Kyle will have a tough start, finding out that the remnants of the Empire, held by the Dark Jedi the Sun, are working hard on empowering their armies with Force. All to take power over the universe once and for all. Since he's unable to face the Sun on even ground and is easily defeated, like a noob no less, and witnesses the Sun ordering his sidekick Tavion to brutally kill his once friend and mentor and now beloved Jan Ors, he loses it. Defeated, depressed and on the verge of losing everything he ever cared for, Kyle drowns in the sea of whiskey, drinking more than any other former Jedi ever had. Wait a minute, that's not it at all. Someone must have done some kind of Jedi mindfuckery on me when I was preparing this episode and fed me lies. Oh, so many lies. It seems that in reality, enraged and powerless Kyle decides he won't drink himself to death, but instead will travel to Valley of the Jedi to regain his Force powers and then to Jedi Academy to reclaim his lightsaber from Luke Skywalker. When he finally gets there, Luke reveals to Kyle that the Sun was indeed a bad and corrupted Sith and that he was also a former Academy student under Kyle, which you know, is all kinds of troublesome. And since this little bit of extra upsetting information along with Kyle's rather unstable mental state after hearing about Jan may lead him to the dark side again, Luke prepares a series of trials for Kyle to prove that he's capable of keeping his shit together and not succumbing to the no-no Jedi side. Kyle naturally passes in flying colors, in no small part, thanks to your taking control over him at the start of the game, and this is where your adventure truly begins. While most of the game unveils in a linear manner, switching between first-person shooting and the third-person lightsaber action, the writing as you'd expect from Star Wars and LucasArts is excellent and the gameplay is polished to reflect it too. And especially that it reached far and wide to the previous games, building on what they established. So not only Kyle regains his powers, but since he had previously befallen temporarily to the dark side, he eventually gets access to abilities from both ends of the spectrum, and best of all, you get to use them. And trust me, it's hella fun. I mean, powers like Force Push, Jedi Mind Trick or Force Jump are the obvious ones here, but there is also juicy stuff like Force Lightning and Force Grip available, which you know, is extra fun when you wanna lay some Jedi-powered justice. Sudden Strike 2 is a real-time tactical strategy set during World War II. It's a direct sequel to the first title and still covers conflict between the Allies and Soviets against Germans and newly added Japan. The setting, kinds of units and weaponry are all historically accurate and modeled to look and work the same way they really did, but the missions are mostly fictional and so are their objectives. The strategies you can employ, however, are all at the very least semi-realistic. Tanks, for instance, as opposed to most other RTSs of the time, are not this indestructible machinery of death and domination, and while they can cause more than significant damage against most other units and completely decimate infantry when facing them 1v1, if you happen to have bazooka units or howitzers, they can quickly be stopped in their tracks and made to be just these huge metal monuments of failure. Same goes for other units too. I mean, if a mission calls for going through a terrain that's under constant attack, it's best to take the enemies from afar with snipers rather than send countless squadrons of regular troops against them, as the first approach may result with close to no casualties, while the other will most likely end with a wipe. Is wipe even a term in RTSs? I don't know, but I bet you get what I'm saying here anyway. Point is, smart approach is the best approach, and taking a minute to plan what and how to do is better than rushing to your demise in Sudden Strike 2. Since we're on the units though, I'd like to make a note here that there's around 150 different ones in the game, comprising of ground, air and water ones, and while they will never all appear in a single mission, you will definitely see most of them through all 5 campaigns for Americans, British, Russians, Germans and Japanese. Sudden Strike 2 is not the easiest game out there, really favoring smart over strong or fast tactics, so keep that in mind. While the presentation is not a huge step up over the original, if any at all to be honest, it does offer higher resolutions which allow you to see more of the map at once. Also, most of what you can see, so foliage, buildings and whatnot, is entirely destructible depending on how much damage you can cause to it, so that's a nice and always welcome touch. Sudden Strike 2 may not be the best RTS out there, probably not even of 2002, but it's definitely one of the best when it comes to realism of units and strategies. And fun. when you get used to its rather demanding loop, that is. I am going to commit a sin in most of your eyes here, but I always preferred Icewind Dale 2 over Baldur's Gate 2. And yes, I am aware that objectively speaking Baldur's Gate is a better of two titles, and yes, I really like it. I just like Icewind Dale 2 more. Hard to tell why, perhaps it was refocusing on tactical combat encounters as opposed to complicated storyline. Perhaps it was Chris Avellon's involvement, you know, the famous Chris touch. Oh my god, please don't clip it out of the context, please. Point is, I can't put the finger to the exact reason, but it was what it was, and I just enjoyed Icewind Dale 2 far more. With that out of the way, let's focus on what it is. Icewind Dale 2 is a party-based role-playing set in the Forgotten Realms and based on the 3rd edition of Dungeons & Dragons rule set. Same as all other titles, using Infinity Engine pioneered with first Baldur's Gate, the perspective is top-down and isometric, and the game world is composed out of individual locations connected via load screens. As per usual with Black Isles games of the time, you can either start with pre-made party or create your own of up to 6 adventurers from ground up. You do so by choosing their gender, race, class, alignment and attributes. Both race and alignment may and will influence how the NPCs will respond to you and the available dialogue options, so keep that in mind, especially for the future playthroughs. Combat is naturally real-time with an active pause used to issue commands to multiple party members and to overlook tactical situation on the battlefield. And it is that combat really that is the star of the show, as it relies on you knowing what you're doing, what your characters are capable of, and how to compose the most effective party, both in terms of their composition and also class and multi-class choices. Icewind Dale 2 is just a 2002's min-maxer's dream and also the best imaginable campaign to test the builds out, as it's chock full of different combat scenarios, with small, big, odd and funky enemies, all different and all requiring careful approach and smart planning. Kinda like conversations with my boss's wife are. You can suggest her anything, even if it's good for the company, you gotta dress it in words and walk around the subject carefully so that she would think, nay, no, in her dark demonic heart, that the idea originally came from her. I mean, it's so good, it couldn't have come from anywhere else, now could it? The story of Icewind Dale 2 begins with a group arriving by a ship in the city of Targos, to help in its defense against storming it army of goblins. They're your group and you're in control, so you know, as soon as you arrive, goblins begin falling left and right and you just walk around knee-deep in their blood and guts, serving as the main driving force in their fall. Seeing that your small group single-handedly had turned the tide of the battle, Mayor of Targos asks you to lead an offensive on the goblin army, which once again you do by creating yet another lake of red. Well, at least until you get to their chieftain and remove his limbs from his corpse, ending his pitiful existence once and for all. Well, I may be exaggerating a little here, at least when it comes to details behind the outcome of the meeting with a slimy creature, but he did not come out of it alive, and you did learn that he was actually working under command of a mysterious unknown woman named Sherinkhal. And while she sounds like the ultimate villain of the game, like my boss's wife, you learn soon enough that the forces behind the attack are much darker and more nefarious, and that she too was barely a pawn in a bigger scheme. From then onward, you will embark on a long campaign of turning all the white, so snow around you, into hot red and cleansing the lands of all evil. You know that I lied to you again, right? Well, there is a lot of snow all around, you also turned some green and grey red too. Either way, regardless of all the paints, be it red or otherwise, Icewind Dale 2 is fantastic, and if you're a fan of D&D or role-playing games overall, you'll no doubt love it. I've recently saw an infographic showing that the most common nightmare across Europe and US is teeth falling out. I don't know about yourself, but I did indeed had it more than once, and it's not pleasant. And Silent Hill 2 Restless Dreams is all about that, teeth falling out. Nope, it's not. I'm really not sure where I was going with it, so ignore all that, despite it being factually correct, well at least until I've mixed Silent Hill into it, and let's just start again. Silent Hill 2 Restless Dreams is a survival horror video game and an updated version of PlayStation 2's original Silent Hill 2. It's also, next to Resident Evil and maybe Alone in the Dark, the most famous horror series ever. The gameplay comprises of finding your way around monsters-filled titular town of Silent Hill while seeking your wife, which is a very interesting story tidbit, but we'll get to that in a minute when we'll be tackling the plot. Unlike two other giants of the genre, Silent Hill 2 doesn't feature pre-rendered graphics with static camera viewpoints and instead offers a full 3D presentation with camera following our protagonist. And to survive, he'll obviously need to collect weapons, health restoring items and solve puzzles. Well, also kill a bunch of monsters, but it kinda goes without saying. You'll always also have a tiny bit too few bullets for comfort, but that, I suppose, is a staple of the genre. Interestingly enough, the game is set in the previously unexplored in the original part of the town and features new enemies too. The difficulty level can be adjusted independently for combat and puzzles, which is a very nice addition for people like myself. because I'm fine with the puzzles being on the more demanding side, but I always sucked at the surviving part of all these survival horror games. So yeah, if a zombie apocalypse happens, make sure to stay away, as I will be within the first bunch to get eaten. The story focuses on James Sunderland, which funny enough in Latin means a friend of a Darkfiend seal. Don't check that, trust me. James arrives in Silent Hill after receiving a letter from his wife Mary, urging him to come over. Now you may think here that there's nothing odd or special about it, they're just in two different locations for whatever the reason, perhaps work, and she asked him to come over. I mean, why wouldn't he? And why wouldn't he indeed? Other than the fact that she passed away 3 years prior. And there is literally no way it could have been her who wrote the letter. Or is there? So it will be up to you to figure out what happened and solve this unusual mystery. And that, my dear viewers, is Silent Hill 2. Hegemonia is a sci-fi space set real-time strategy that is very similar to a giant of the genre, Homeworld. In fact, some would say that it's better than Homeworld. I would sustain from such statements as my experience with most RTSs is rather superficial and rarely goes over the initial 2-3 hours. Kinda like the one I have with roller coasters. I know of them, been on one, and that's pretty much all the experience with them that I need in my life. Anyway, Hegemonia is a true RTS behemoth as it includes everything you'd expect from the game in the genre, and more. Not only it features beautifully depicted and super easy to control, but demanding to strategize space battles, but also deep and detailed planetary simulation, in which you must find and hold the balance between production, research and taxation of your citizens. And while you may want to maximize one over the others, depending on your situation in-game, it's that aforementioned balance that's the key to success in the long run. There are hero units that you can build too, and you can either assign them to squadrons to complement their stats and strengthen their combat capabilities, or to planets to act as governors and boon them too. And while what I just said is barely scratching the surface, you can rest assured that the amount of choices and decision making in Hegemonia on basically every step of your campaign is never lacking. You can naturally build many different ships and construct objects in space, so nimble fighters, battle platforms or even mining stations among others will be something you'll be involved in production of near constantly. You know, to keep that balance I seem to be talking about all the time. But it's not all about resource extraction, combat and planetary management, because you can do so much more in Hegemonia you wouldn't believe. You can undertake special missions, steal money, information or tech from your opponents, you can assassinate enemy leaders and even run negative propaganda campaigns, lowering their planetary morale. Heck, you can even terraform planets, and while it takes a long while, it's ultimately worth it and very profitable in the long run. Believe it or not, but I've only touched on what Hegemonia is briefly, and there's still much more to it. That said, what's most interesting about it is its story. It is set in 2104, when the conflict between Earth and Mars colonies ignites to the point of being on the verge of war. While Earth is the center of political power in the galaxy, most technology and inventions come from Mars. And after years of being pushed around and used by Blue Marble, Mars finally wants independence and recognition as a sovereign nation. Since the conflict is brewing to the point of near boiling, a peace conference is organized on Earth to discuss the future of both planets. Mars shuttle carrying diplomats is destroyed en route by an unknown spaceship that disappeared as fast as it appeared, and no one knows where it came from. This event leads to war, despite there being an obvious third party at play, a party that may not even be human. Hegemonia is a gem of an RTS, and if you're at all into the genre, you should definitely check it out. Warcraft 3: Reign of Chaos is the real-time high fantasy strategy and the last and final full-fledged RTS entry in the series before the release of granddaddy of most modern MMORPGs and an ultra-popular game in its own right, World of Warcraft. Reign of Chaos starts after the events of the second game, in which the Orcish Horde had been finally put to rest. Well, their dark portal was destroyed and the remaining armies without supplies and reinforcements were decimated, with only few of them who were scattered or wounded surviving. They are held in the internment camps now, because that's what humans do. I mean, I'm not justifying what the Horde did, as it was unthinkable, just saying that there's gotta be a better solution, a better way to deal with the unwanted than keeping them in camps. Either way, a new warchief emerges among orcs, frees them and takes them to a new continent across the seas to start anew. Whether they live in peace or just regroup to prepare for another offensive remains to be seen, but the point is that for now at least they will be gone, far away, and pose close to no risk to the Alliance forces at all. As that happens, a mysterious plague keeps spreading among the human populace, turning people into the living dead, so ghoulifying them for the lack of a better word. And all that in wake of the undead armies preparing a way for the Burning Legion to enter the world of Azeroth and take it as their own. Now, ain't that all a great setup for a game? Warcraft 3 is composed out of 5 separate campaigns and offers 4 playable races of humans, orcs, night elves and the undead. And the overarching tale focuses on joint efforts between former enemies of the Alliance and orcs, along with the night elves, to thwart the undead scourge before they manage to corrupt the world tree enough to allow their masters to enter Azeroth. If you've played previous Warcraft games, you'll find yourself right at home in the third, because while there are some new additions to the formula, the overall gameplay remained unchanged and is still all about the traditional for the genre trifecta of resource gathering, base and units building and combat. Each of the races has their own unique set of buildings, units, technology and gameplay tactics, so if you're a fan of RTS, this one's really going to be a fun one, as each and every one of the campaigns feels different. The new additions to the franchise are the hero units, that gain experience and level up, creeps that are these natural but aggressive creatures guarding key areas, line of sight, terrain height along with its advantages and disadvantages, and a day-night cycle. I may not be an RTS gamer myself, in any shape or form really, but if you are, then you either know of Warcraft 3 already, or just discovered your next favorite game. Either way, you're welcome. Big Scale Racing is a 1/5 scale RC simulation and a pretty darn sweet game at that. If you've ever seen or had one of these 1/5 scale cars in real life, you know that they're in a league of their own when compared to traditional RCs. For one, they are much bigger and heavier, which means that they behave more similar to their real counterparts. For two, they have real engines and run on petrol as opposed to the smaller ones that use batteries. And finally, given the size and power under their hoods, they feel very, very, very real. And Big Scale Racing simulates the hobbyist sport near perfectly. It offers 6 different feeling and looking tracks that can be played on in varying weather conditions, 10 unique and highly detailed cars representing a wide spectrum of choices, from slower beginner-friendly ones all the way to the miniature supercars, countless CPU opponents, each of which has their own behavioral patterns and skill level, and 2 race types, Cup Race, which pits all identical cars against each other, and Open Race that allows for mixing of vehicles present in it. There's also a local split screen and LAN 8-player multiplayer, which is always fun. There are 4 main game modes in Big Scale Racing, so Training, Quick Race and Championship Phases 1 and 2, and while the first 2 are self-explanatory, let me briefly explain the last couple. Championship Phase 1 is a 10-cup championship, an appetizer and considerably shorter of the 2 modes, and Championship Phase 2 is the real deal, the main course of the game and one that pits you against 240 opponents and you must beat them all to become victorious. Well, 239 really, as you're the last one. It's worth pointing out that Phase 2 becomes available only after you unlock all cars in Phase 1, so treat the first like the tutorial before the main thing. If you're someone who loves RC cars or even enjoys casual racing, Big Scale Racing is definitely a game not to skip. The Thing is a squad-based third-person survival horror shooter that is set as a sequel to John Carpenter's 1982 film of the same name. It focuses on a member of United States Army Special Forces member Captain Blake. His team is sent to an Antarctic outpost to investigate what exactly took place there during the events of the movie. And the kicker here is that the shape-shifting alien that was supposedly killed during what we saw on the big screen is still alive and very, very, very angry. Also not alone, so there's that too. The game is composed out of 20 levels and chock full of different combat scenarios in which we'll fight against mainly 3 distinct types of aliens: scuttlers, walkers and bosses. The first is rather easy to put down, the other 2 however require first being weakened with regular gunfire and then killed off with flamethrower. All bosses require additional tactics, but the overall principle of filling them with bullets until they're ready to burst before setting them ablaze is a constant even when facing the biggest of threats. You're able to recruit and command many different NPCs throughout the game's campaign. And while they differ considerably, they too come in 3 flavors: soldiers, engineers and medics. So steaks, burgers and a bubblegum. Engineers can repair fuse boxes which control doors, computers and save points. Yes, you heard that right, save points. Soldiers are soldiers, so very proficient at killing, and medics can heal you and your other companions. Close the wound with a half-chewed gum if you will. The recruitment is based on the trust fear system, meaning that the more trustworthy the NPCs are of you, the more likely they will join you. And if they suspect that you may be the Thing, or when they fear you, they will straight up attack. You can gain their trust by offering them weapons, ammo, by healing them, or by using a test kit on yourself to prove that you are not in fact inhuman. Perhaps an ugly human, but still one. I mean, you could just jump into a long and detailed explanation why Captain Jean-Luc Picard was the best Star Trek captain and then prove your humanity that way, since no alien could ever comprehend the complexity of his character. But that's something that the devs failed to implement, most likely due to limited budget or development time. Shame on them. The fear system has few nuances too and can make NPCs attack you, other NPCs, or even die of heart attack among others, and raises mainly through finding particularly gruesome blood-covered locations, mangled corpses, by hearing but not seeing enemies, or by being attacked by multiple aliens at the same time. Interestingly enough, and also quite realistically, fear affects NPCs' performance too, which I find a very nice, even if troublesome at times, addition. There are also infections to be worried about, and all of the NPCs may become infected and after a period of time turn into walkers and attack you and your team. Now, many of them have their infection periods scripted at particular points during the campaign, but all of them can actually get ill earlier on too, which adds a lot of unpredictability for the subsequent playthroughs. As survival horrors go, not gonna lie, I prefer those that are similar to The Thing rather than to Resident Evil, so if you're alike, you're gonna have a lot of fun with this one. You're not gonna believe it, and please don't hate me for that, but American Conquest is the third RTS in today's video. As the name may suggest, the game is set between late 15th and early 19th century and focuses on conquer and then defense of American continent. And it's a huge title in all aspects imaginable. Not only it features 12 unique nations that you can play as, so most of European forces and natives, but also a lot of resources to gather for your buildings and units production. 6 of them in fact, so wood, food, gold, stone, coal and iron. There are 106 different buildings in the game and 100 unique units too, making American Conquest one of the most deep and diverse games of its genre and time. It features 8 large campaigns, with one of them being more or less historically accurate American War for Independence. Oh, and did I mention that at any given moment there can be up to 16,000 units on screen at once? Yeah, imagine the sheer tactical scale and strategy required to lead thousands of units into battle. And especially that all of them are different, have their own weak and strong sides, can be arranged in numerous formations and even get better and better with subsequent wins. The addition of morale system plays a big role in combat too, and while it's nothing new in the genre, I mean even 1991's Centurion included it, albeit in a very primitive form, it's always welcome as another underlying mechanic to keep an eye on. I'm sure that all of you min-maxers will appreciate it. Either way, I may have not played American Conquest a lot, in fact it was probably close to nothing, a couple of hours at most, but I'm not an RTS gamer. But despite that, I can and do appreciate its uncanny qualities. So if you're someone who's into the genre, and better yet care for historical games, American Conquest may be down your alley. I feel that F1 games have stopped innovating a long time ago, and that the tech that we have available at hand now reached the level that they just cannot become any more realistic. Well, other than maybe adding some kind of VR or other gimmicks that would make them feel more real. Maybe movable cockpits with steering wheels or something, I don't know. Point is, I feel that we've stopped innovating and only ever focus on polishing of the graphics and updating the roster of cars and drivers. And there's nothing wrong with that, it's what happens with most sports games after all. But that's today, in 2025. In 2002, well, I'm sure some innovations were still happening. And F1 2002 from EA was arguably the best game in its subgenre of racing for that year. Now, it's perhaps not as convoluted in tons of detail and adjustable elements as earlier Jeff Cramon's Grand Prix games were, but it's plenty enough complicated for you to have to practice a lot and either learn how to drive a simulated F1 bolide or keep all of the assistance features on. Sure, if you know what you're doing and you've practiced enough to turn them off, you may actually perform better, but don't expect it to be the case from the first game launch. It naturally goes without saying that every track, driver, team or even pit crew member from the official 2002 season are included, and that the standard game modes of full season, single race training and test sessions are what the game is built around. So if you've seen previous entries in the series, there are no surprises here. Either way, if you're a fan of F1 and happen to want to play a game from 2002 and not a modern one for whatever the reason, F1 2002 is as good as they come. Blood Omen 2 is a third-person action-adventure game and a direct follow-up to the first Blood Omen. Kane, the titular vampire, has assembled an army of vampires to conquer and take over the world for himself to lead. And as he's cutting through Nosgoth, he aims to claim its most important city of Meridan. As he approaches the settlement, however, he is met and challenged by the Seraphan Order and its leader, Seraphan Lord. They engage in combat and Kane is eventually beaten by the vampire hunter, who takes his sword Soul Reaver, leaving mangled and broken Kane behind. How mangled is he? Like a curly fry among a pack of straight ones. 200 years later, Kane finally awakens under the care of the vampire Uma, disgraced and angry because of his defeat. Also tired and hungry, but that is kinda obvious. And since 200 years is a lot, the world has changed completely. The city of Meridan is prospering, sorta, as it's governed and protected by the dictatorship like Seraphan Order. There are dozens of magical wards spread around the city, protecting it from vampires, and the machinery and industry too is fueled by the unknown to Kane but powerful glyph magic. Seeing all the change and how few vampires survived in this new world, flame of anger and revenge fires up within Kane and he swears to do both. Defeat the Seraphan Lord that he previously fell to and reclaim his rightful place as the ruler of all vampires, preferably both at the same time. Kane can still use his vampire powers, run, jump, fight and do a little of that sweet vampire parkour, and he will have to. Since the magical wards barrier him from entering certain locations, he will often have to seek a way around them. Glyphs are not only deadly to Kane though, but also used as a source power for any and all inventions around the city, so many of the environmental puzzles that you'll have to solve will require Kane to create glyph circuits to move power between locations. As per usual with Legacy of Kain games, you start unarmed, but will get access to several different weapons along your adventure. Staves, broadswords, daggers, axes and many others, and they all have limited durability that decreases with use and blocking. Other than those, you also have your vampire special powers, which you acquire by defeating bosses. And these two are aplenty and varied, and also used in environmental puzzling too. So stuff like invisibility, fire projectiles, telekinesis, or even leaps over vast distances to name a few. All these will be your tools of trade for your ultimate victory over the Seraphan Order. If or when you get wounded, you can always replenish your health by feeding on nearby living creatures. It may require beating them to the pulp first, but you've done much worse so far in other Legacy of Kain games to date, so it shouldn't be a problem. If you played earlier titles, you'll love Blood Omen 2, and if you didn't, it's as good place as any to start and have a lot of fun. As we've established in previous videos where I've covered Tony Hawk's Pro Skater games, I don't care much for them and played very little of them. But it doesn't mean that I'm ignorant and that I cannot appreciate them. I mean, I definitely am an ignorant, and there's probably like 20-30 countries that I could not tell you where they are located in the world going by the name alone, and could only shoot at a ballpark location based on their names alone, but that is a completely different reason for me being ignorant. Anyway, the Create a Skater mode has been expanded upon in THPS 3 and allows for much more customization than ever. And if you're someone who prefers to play as real-life skaters, there's plenty of them in the game too. I mean, Eliza Steamer, Jamie Thomas, Steve Caballero, Rune Gilfberg, Jeff Rowley, Andrew Reynolds, Rodney Mullen, Eric Coston, Chad Muska, Bucky Lazek, Pam Maguire and Tony Hawk. I bet that these names mean something to you. To me, other than the last two, one of which is in the game's title and the other appeared in numerous Jackass movies, sounds like a random people of the street, but we've already established my ignorance, so it shouldn't be a surprise really. THPS 3 is still all about tricks and performing point combos by chaining them together and about mastering the board. In fact, the combos could be longer than ever before and the entire trick system was remade from ground up, which was sadly not everyone's cup of tea. But it's only human to fear change, as we are creatures of habit. It's a mistake though, and a fault in our programming, as changes, if not distinctively negative, are usually sources of new experiences and these in turn broaden our horizons and open our minds. But whatever, it is what it is, and let's not focus on that and get back to our game. So the levels this time are much more interactive, which makes them more fun to ride around on and seek new and fun ways to perform chains of tricks on too. But the biggest and most significant change of them all has got to be the inclusion of an online system, which while perhaps not available anymore, was groundbreaking at the time, for a skater game at least. To this very day, Gothic 2 is considered by many as one of the best third-person view fantasy action role-playing games ever made, and not for no reason. It's a follow-up to the first Gothic, and in many ways a lot like Beloved by the fans' original, only polished, expanded upon, and fixing things that required correcting from the first game. While Gothic 2 uses the same, albeit updated engine, the game world is many times larger than previously, and the entire Mind Valley from the first Gothic is now only a tiny part of the game world. Factions make a big comeback too, and these are the Militia, the Mercenaries and the Fire Mages, and joining either will provide you not only with unique abilities but also different quests and modified storyline. Which you know, is great if you're someone who likes to replay games after a while, as it means you'll have a lot of new content to discover and have fun with. After the barrier around the prison colony in the first game was destroyed, all supplies to the kingdom have stopped, as there were no more prisoners to mine them. So King, seeing no other choice or way to deal with the situation, sends 100 of his best paladins along with Lord Hagen to secure the supplies. Given that the farmers and miners formed an alliance with refugees from prison and no longer needed the king, you can only imagine how tense the situation in the valley was. That is just the background to it all, cause our nameless hero that you will play as still lies buried under a pile of rocks after having defeated the demon known as the Sleeper in the first game. as he was taking his first few steps towards the light. And remember kids, never go towards the light, it's the dark that's your friend and a chance of survival. Anyway, so after taking these first few proverbial steps and familiarizing himself with the concept of being no more, he is suddenly unexpectedly rescued by the renegade mage Exardas. Exardas informs our hero about a new and considerably bigger danger than any demon could ever be, an army of evil that is rapidly growing and is led by dragons, and also tells him that he should meet with Lord Hagen, seeking Eye of Ainos, an artifact allowing the owner to speak with the dragons to learn about the reason for their aggression. And this is where the game begins. Gothic 2 came out in an interesting time. It had quite a big competition when it did, and its biggest rival was Morrowind. It's difficult, if even possible, to compare these two, as it's not really apples to apples, more like apples to a hot dog situation here, but they're both fantastic. Both entirely different too, and especially Gothic 2, as when I think about it now, it's not really a hot dog, and more like haggis or Marmite or something similar. It's an acquired taste, and those who liked it, loved it, but there were also these that couldn't stand its gameplay, controls or underlying mechanics. The rule of the thumb says that if you liked the first game, you would also like the second. And as for the newcomers to the series, well, give it a chance, you may love it. And if you don't lose anything really, but a little bit of time only. I guarantee that you did not expect me to talk about Eternal Daughter. What's more, I'm convinced that you've never even heard about it. It was not very popular, not very well known, and in part probably because of being freeware. But trust me, it is worth a mention. It's an anime-themed adventure platformer set in the world that mixes fantasy and sci-fi elements effortlessly. Sounds cool and ideal, I know, but it's anything but. The world of Eternal Daughter is in fact a terrible, despicable, dystopian place to be, and one you'd not wish on your worst enemy. It's a world where slavery is a norm, where abuse, violence and even rape are not frowned upon, but just a part of its inhabitants' daily lives, under the oppressive rule of the Nazi-like Duganga race. It's terrible, which stands in a stark contrast to the game's presentation that is more cute than anything you've seen so far in today's video. But the bright colored and nice looking locations and creatures are there only to fool you. Nearly everything in Eternal Daughter is out to kill you. Well, not you, but Mia, game's protagonist. The hostilities, however, are omnipresent despite the cuteness of it all. Anyway, Mia is of the Lorian race, deeply spiritual humanoids who live in peace with nature. What Lorian are not, though, is proficient in combat or aggressive. So when evil Duganga invade them, they fall like autumn leaves, so quickly losing all will to live and all the way to the ground. Mia is a daughter of a Lorian priestess and an unknown father. And same as everyone else, she's enslaved to do menial labor under the supervision of her half-Duganga brother, Hume. Her life is similar to all other Lorians, so all that she has to look forward to each day is being hit less painfully, used less frequently and discarded after all that's done, rather than hit some more. She is treated as if she was subhuman. So yeah, as you can pretty much guess, pain and suffering are Lorian's daily bread, and a little pain is much better than the severe one. On one of those terrible, awful and depressing days, so you know, for you and I it would be either Monday, Wednesday or maybe Sunday, but for Lorians it's every day. Mia witnesses her Duganga stepfather hitting her mother particularly badly and she loses her shit. Mia, not the mother. Mother gains a perk of Black Eye and -3 points to Charisma, while Gar, the stepfather, gains 17 points to being a dick and 5 to being a little dipshit that's worth nothing. It goes without saying that most of his stats are in the deep negative. Anyway, Mia notices the violence, goes berserk, and at that particular moment her newfound and previously unknown powers of light magic manifest and set Gar straight, as in beating the living shit of that living shit. As much as Gar was asking for it, Mia does not stand a chance against the entire Duganga race alone, so, following her mother's advice, she decides to flee her village. Even though it made her sad, Mia for once finally saw a ray of hope cutting through grey cloudy skies of her life. Hope for peace, for equality, and for Lorians to regain their freedom. So, she sets on a mission to find and rally allies and defeat the Duganga once and for all. Eternal Daughter is a Metroidvania kind of a platformer, meaning that it offers an entirely open world. It's vast and with plenty of areas that are either difficult or impossible to get to, until our heroine will acquire powers that will let her do that. The enemies are plenty and often very difficult too, so it's not always worth to involve yourself in combat, and it's often more profitable in the long run to avoid them rather than face them and risk losing HP. Eternal Daughter is a game of contrasts, cause it's equally as depressing as it's interesting and playable. If you're someone who doesn't get upset easily, it's an easy and cheap recommendation, cause you know, it's free. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets is the second Harry Potter game on PC, and it follows the events depicted in the movie. For those 7 of you unfamiliar with who Harry Potter is, let me quickly bring you up to speed. Harry was an orphan, living with his uncle, aunt and cousin, and they're all dicks. I mean, Harry isn't, but the family, man, they suck. Big time. Anyway, despite being told that his parents died in a car accident, when he turned 13, he received an invitation to join Hogwarts, a school of magic, where he learned that in reality, his parents were killed by another evil wizard going by the name of... Ah, you nearly got me there, you sneaky you. We do not speak his name here. What's more, the wizard, let's call him Smelly Breath, apparently tried to kill Harry too, but failed, leaving him with a scarred forehead and seemingly dying in the process. So RIP Smelly Breath. Since we now know the background to it all, what is the game actually about? In Chamber of Secrets, which sounds like a title for an adult-themed movie, Harry is in his 2nd year in Hogwarts. Someone is secretly attacking and petrifying mudbloods, so wizards with human ancestors, and Harry and the gang need to solve the murderous puzzle. It seems that the answer to it all may lie in the Chamber of Secrets, a secret room where Hermione meets with her wooers and lovers. Wooer, what a word, it instantly makes me feel 40 years older. I don't think I've used it more than once before, so that would make it a 2nd here today. Wow, honestly, I'm not sure if I'll ever get to use it again. Oh, and naturally, the room has nothing to do with Hermione, I have no idea why I went with it in that direction. Anyway, Chamber of Secrets is an action-adventure game with most of its focus placed on that action side of it. So you run around 3-dimensional levels, solve mostly environmental puzzles, many of which are jump puzzles. And I know that some of you hate those with a passion of a toothless beaver. You also learn and cast new spells, and all of that to progress through a rather linear, even if open-world story that follows the movie closely. Other than chasing the plot, adventuring and occasional combat, you can also collect wizard cards here in 3 varieties: bronze, silver and gold. And they are both useful to have and fun to hunt down. Well, if you're a collector at heart, cause if you're not, they're no more than the necessary evil that you have to go out of your way to find. There are quite a few minigames in Chamber of Secrets, and while their existence is not necessary, they run the game up as a complete package nicely. Chamber of Secrets may have been targeting a younger audience at launch, but I'd risk saying that it's good enough for everyone to give it a chance. If you ever played Caesar 3 or Pharaoh, you'll feel in Emperor Rise of the Middle Kingdom right at home. It too is a city-building micromanagement heaven, only set in China and covering 3000 years of its history. So, same as in its predecessors, you're responsible for everything to keep the city running and prospering. So you'll be making sure to feed your population to keep them happy, healthy and safe from internal and external hazards. Now, if that was all, Emperor would be a very simple and uninteresting game. So naturally, there's much more. You also have to keep an eye on trade and taxation, earning and saving money to fund your further expansion and development. Other than the standard city building fare, there are a few additional interesting mechanics in the Emperor. For instance, heroes, who you should make offerings to prevent them from becoming angry and sending disasters your way. And also to keep them happy, cause when they're happy you're happy, and when you're happy, good things happen to the city. I mean, who wouldn't want their city to have a hero visit it, stroll around the streets waving at people, posing for selfies with fans, I mean, group paintings, it was not the time for selfies yet, and giving inspirational TED Talks. I mean, speeches. Yeah, speeches. Everyone wants that in their city. Other than the Emperor, like literally the Emperor of China that you have to keep happy, there are also neighboring cities, and it's beneficial in the long run to have them like you too. I mean, who wouldn't like you? You're like the most lovable person ever. I liked you the very moment you clicked play, and if you tap on that sub, share and bell icons too, I'll be like 2 dates away from proclaiming my eternal love to you. Anyway, it goes without saying that you have to keep an army, and also, if resources allow, build defensive walls. Your city is the best city, and those who don't have it as good will want to grab a piece of your pie, and Joey does not share food. Tech, religion and various inventions will change throughout the ages and will more or less follow the real history of China, which is a very nice and welcome touch. So are the campaigns, which span literal thousands of years, so you may be sent to manage and expand on different cities by different ruling emperors, and then, after a while, be sent to those you've previously governed, which is an interesting concept as it allows you to witness how they evolved over time or how they've fallen into ruin, because both are as feasible. There are 7 of these campaigns in the game, and while they can be completed in any order, I'd suggest to go through them chronologically, as that's how their difficulty ramps up too. Warrior Kings is a bit of a sleeper hit and a title that deserved much more recognition and popularity than it received. It's not a game without faults, mind you, just one that got the short end of the stick, failing to garner wide enough spread to pick up and become something much bigger. It's a fantasy-themed real-time tactical strategy set in a world torn between religion and technology, so imperial and pagan factions respectively. Or paths, I should say really. Well, there's also a Renaissance one too, that grants access to siege engines and gunpowder to name a few, but it also prevents you from having access to the strongest units of the main too. Each of the factions is naturally unique and grants you different units and powers, and their implementation in the campaign is something I've not seen in any other game. It's done in a very novel and one-of-a-kind way, and based on a branching approach to the mission structure, meaning that there are certain points in the campaign which call for a choice from your end. But instead of letting you pick which faction ideology you'd like to side with, you are usually giving a yes-no question, and your pick at those points will decide who you'll follow for a while after. While that idea is rather fun and adds a lot to the replayability, these key moments come without any warning, and you're not always 100% sure which way the game will swing after you provide your answer. And trust me when I tell you that playing with religious fanatics is something entirely different than doing so with a technology-focused group. Either way, the campaign is split into missions, and each of them can have multiple objectives and challenges that can also vary considerably from one another, ranging from box standard building up of your settlement and units and having to defeat the enemy, to puzzling missions where you're giving a set of carefully picked units and a goal, and no support or change to add more soldiers to your side until you complete it. It forces you to plan out your strategy step by step and weight all your decisions rather than focus on traditional RTS trifecta of resource gathering, base and unit building, and warfare. I mean, there's plenty of this here too, just not all of them follow the trope. Combat encounters are well executed and take into account not only strengths and weaknesses of particular units, but also terrain. So archers are more effective from high ground, which is also a terrain much easier to defend, but cavalry too can gain higher speed and as a result of that, strength when galloping downhill rather than on flat ground. There are also formations present in Warrior Kings. Combat survivors earn experience and in time get better and better as they win more and more battles. And both of these can and will influence outcome of any and all engagements. As with most RTS games, Warrior Kings has a story too, and it's a tale of Arthas, an heir to the throne, who after witnessing a betrayal resulting in his father's killing, flees his homeland to gather forces to plot his revenge. Overall, despite some small pathfinding and campaign choices issues, Warrior Kings is a decent addition to the genre and a game all fans of it should try out. Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 is a sequel to the original and another amazing game from legendary developer Chris Sawyer. You're still in charge of a theme park and still have to turn it from a playground with 2 swings and an old rubber tire into a money grab scheme that will empty the pockets of your customers, all the while filling their hearts with warm and fuzzy feeling of fun. In fact, it's a balancing act of a game where you need to keep your expenses in check and your income growing. So, to do all that and keep your park visitors happy, you have a whole slew of different attractions and services at hand. There are gentle, thrill and transport rides, obviously roller coasters too, water rides, shops, stalls, bathrooms, ATMs and information kiosks, among others. The main feature of the game is naturally the roller coaster designer, and in this second outing, you can really have a lot of fun with it. It's a rather robust and powerful tool and makes it all the more entertaining being able to create your own rides and then see them bring in money. Or, if you're me, spending way too much time designing RCs that then no one cares to ride. But I'm special that way, so you know, it may not be something that you'll ever have to worry about yourself. Any and all amusement parks naturally need stuff to keep running, maintained and clean, and RCT2 is no different, so you'll have to hire and manage workers. Overall, if you've never played the first, RCT2 is a fantastic little game and a lot of fun all the way through. But if you did graduate to it from the original, there are a few things that make it a tad disappointing release. Well, at least for me. For one, the engine and the graphics, aside from a few new and a couple of removed assets, are both the same, even despite the games releasing 3 years apart. I mean, it could be argued that the simple isometric presentation is timeless, but it's also stale if the sequel you were waiting for changed virtually nothing about it. Secondly, the roller coaster designer, a few Six Flags coasters and a bit more demanding scenarios are the only things I can tell from the top of my head that were new additions to the sequel. They're all fine really, nothing to complain about, but they're just a bit too little to justify the 2 and not 1.5 numbering next to the game's title. And finally, and this may come as a surprise to you, the biggest fault to me about RCT2 is lack of a sandbox mode. Because while scenarios are fine and all I want from my business simulation games is to take them to the extreme, to run the companies for so long until I will reverse the money counter or freeze the game, because designers never expected anyone to make as much money. That, the sandbox mode that is what I feel would have made it a full-fledged 2.0 release. I loved Mad Max movies as a kid. I mean, I probably still do, just not seen the originals in a while. I like both modern remakes too, even the Furiosa that world somehow collectively decided to hate. It sits at 7.5 at IMDb, which is not bad, but in the same time it barely managed to return the investment, and bringing no profit in Hollywood is a clear sign of a failure. Anyway, a mixture of red-hot scorching sun, an ocean of sand-covered deserts, cars made out of scraps, and barbaric post-up atmosphere of it all just do it for me in a weird and an unexplainable way. And Bandits Phoenix Rising is basically all that, short of a compelling plot and focusing on car combat only. So, the world has ended. What happened exactly? Nobody knows, but what is well known is what the world relegated to, and it's left in a constant struggle for fuel, water and ammo. You know, like in Mad Max. You and your gunner Rudolph are members of the Wolfpack gang and plow through the game, completing series of missions like Cookie Monster goes through a jar of double chip cookies. Not gonna lie, while the missions have their individual objectives, so races, duels, train robberies, convoy assaults and raids on enemy bases among others, they could all really be simplified to you versus the world, and it's you who's gotta come out on top, killing any and all enemies that get in your way. It's a very basic premise perhaps, but the combat is action-packed and never stops, so you never really have enough time to ponder about the reason of it all. You do get to listen to Rudolph comment on your shooting or driving skills though, or lack thereof really, which is ironically fun, as if you do remember I did mention that it's actually him who's the gunner. But whatever, his jabs at you are fun and decently varied. You naturally get to upgrade and modify your vehicle, which provides that sense of progression that many lackluster games lack, and Bandits is definitely not one of these. The primary and secondary weapons are plenty varied and you can mix and match them prior to each mission. While the gameplay is all there, I'm sure that we can agree on that, it's also clear from what you're watching that the graphics are excellent too, and the physics engine, at least for the time, was really top of the line, with cars sliding on the sand, colliding with each other, jumping off the hills and tumbling after failed landings, overall feeling like real scrap-made vehicles cutting through harsh endless desert stretches at high speed. Sound design and especially over 150 minutes of original music are top-notch too, though due to the character of this video, you're not really gonna be able to hear them well, so you have to take my word for it. Bandits is a hidden gem of a game and one worth experiencing even today. You're Eike Kusch, a young German man, and you've been murdered in a small quiet town of Lebensbaum, which name roughly means either Tree of Life or my favorite food cream. You know, Leben, so love, and Baum sounds suspiciously like Baum, and then there's that single S in there too, it just gotta stand for food, right? I mean, if not for anything else, then at least to fit my narration. So yeah, pick whichever translation you consider to be correct. Anyway, you're dead, and it sucks. I mean, out of all things you could be, a millionaire, Father of the Year runner-up for small towns and cities in the Oklahoma region, a celebrity chef, a dancing competition winner, or even flat surfaces conservator, you became one no one wants to be. Dead. Well, such is life, or death I suppose, so let's jump to our next game. I seem to have missed the most important detail here, because it appears that your death was not the end, so to speak, and we can't skip Shadow of Destiny just yet, because as you open your eyes, you realize that you're still there, and a being known as Homunculus tells you that while you've been stabbed, it's willing to give you a chance to prevent it. Yep, like literally turn back time. It offers you a time-traveling device and a task of saving your own life. So, your second chance becomes the race against time, as you will have to jump further and further back in time, altering the course of events to prevent your own murder. Shadow of Destiny, aka Shadow of Memories, is, as you can pretty much tell, a very unique time heist of an adventure game. Only you're not committing a theft of an expensive object or any riches, but stealing time, jumping between different periods of it to find that original first butterfly effect moment that started the chain of events that resulted with your killing. And let me tell you, it was not years or decades ago, it was centuries. The game is split into chapters, and while it features no action or instant death elements, all of the chapters are timed, and if you fail to complete the objectives within them in allotted time, they need to be restarted. I think that the best thing about Shadow of Destiny is its time-traveling mechanics, which allow you to change the future, which in turn means that the gameplay is very non-linear and offers a branching storyline leading to one of 6 unique endings on the first playthrough, and an option to unlock another 2 on the consecutive ones. Shadow of Destiny is unlike most other adventure games you've played, so if you're a fan of the genre, you should definitely not skip it. Cultures 2: The Gates of Asgard is a city-building real-time strategy mixture and a game that I've sadly not played myself. At least I don't recall doing so it's highly probable that I never did. So take everything that I will say about it with a grain of salt, a speck of dust, or a boson particle or whatever, and yeah, that's a really bad physics joke. And all that I will tell you about it is what I learned online. Anyway, Cultures 2 is in a lot of ways a bit like more well-known Settlers, as you manage a settlement and have to expand upon it, adding many different structures to it, which in turn offer utilities, features and services to your people. People who are all individuals with their own characters, careers and skills that improve upon training. It's kinda important to keep people trained and happy, as many of the buildings are soft-locked behind skill gates, so they may require your people, well, a few of them at least, to reach certain skill level at particular trades, like milling, mining, agriculture or whatever, to be able to erect more advanced structures. And since there's tons upon tons of these trades, and they also unlock each other upon reaching particular proficiency levels, the entire progression mechanics of Cultures 2 feels very unique. As I mentioned before, each and every person in your settlement is its own one-of-a-kind being and following their own path in life. So they eat, sleep, talk to each other, form couples, marry, have kids, have careers and overall live out their best digital pixel-made lives. You can naturally help them by assigning them to particular jobs to learn particular skills, by giving them tools, homes and clothes, by stocking up their homes with furniture and other useful items, making sure that they're content and growing. In general, you'll be responsible for anything and everything to keep your community growing, for construction, harvesting, production, and even making sure that the couples are actually actively trying to have children, among others. Cultures 2 is both a dream for micromanagement fun and a nightmare for someone who's all about the big picture. Because for all of it, for this entire machinery of a game to work, you'll have to get deep and personal and manage it all by hand, oiling each and every gear by yourself for it not to fall apart. It's not a game loved for everyone, but those that do enjoy that kind of attention to detail will definitely love it. Military and combat is a bit simplified in Cultures 2, but it's understandable given that it's a side mechanic and one to provide variety and a palate cleaner, so to speak, from all the micromanagement. And as such, even if rather basic, it works pretty well. It's worth pointing out that unlike in Settlers, finding an alien to your settlement does not automatically mean that you'll be in the war with it, and you can actually coexist peacefully and even trade with them, which is a nice touch. And so are the treasure chests and quests that you'll uncover on the map, and that will make the game feel more interesting and unpredictable. The game story follows a group of traveling Vikings sailing around the seas and building settlements all around the world, from Normandy to Baghdad. I remember when the first Incoming was used as a benchmark of GPUs, and it was a long time ago. It was a decent action shooter in its own right, but its claim to fame was definitely how it was utilized by professionals. Incoming Forces is a sequel to that game, set 20 years after the original. After defeating the original alien invaders and living in peace and quiet for a while, humanity leaders begin to worry about possible alien retaliation strike and another war that we might not win. And since the pace at which aliens invent, rebuild and rearm themselves is something we just cannot guess, it is agreed that preemptive action is necessary and that we should strike them in the heart of their own homeland. So a gigantic armada of ships is built, armed with the latest and greatest pew-pewers and kaboom boomers, and sent off into space to seek any and all hostile planets and civilizations and eradicate them. After a short while of scouting of the unknown, we've eventually found the planet of the original invaders and begun a little campaign of genocide of our own. And that's how Incoming Forces begin. The only real mode of play other than the slightly botched multiplayer is a linear campaign, which offers 16 unique missions, each with its own set of few different objectives. There are quite a few of these overall in the game, and they can range from defeating of a particular group of enemies, through escort missions, all the way to defense of strategically important locations among others. You naturally get to control a multitude of different vehicles like tanks, bombers, turrets and fighters, and even arm them with a variety of weapons, add weapons between the action-packed mission sections. While Incoming Forces' story is interesting, it definitely takes a backseat, and it's the gameplay that's all about killing that is the king here. And what's more, all of it is for points, so ultimately it's just a score attack kind of a game. A great looking and playing one, but one nonetheless. Patrician 3 is a lie. Just like the Earth going around the Sun and not being a flat disk is a lie. Moon landing? Also a lie. You can't land the craft on a block of cheese, it's too fragile and it would melt from the heat, even kids know that. Or Tupac Shakur and Biggie's killing was a lie. They are hiding on the other side of the disk that we live on, as there's parallel to ours world out there. Pac is an aspiring realtor with a heart of gold and troubled past, and Biggie runs a pastry shop specializing in big events catering. They're both quite well actually. But all of that is not as big of a lie as Patrician 3, because Patrician 3, and hold on to your chairs as it will blow your mind, is actually an expansion pack to Patrician 2, released along with a base game outside of Germany, its country of origin. And despite it being a fantastic business simulation in its own right, I think that the international release method of advertising it as a completely different game, a third installment in the series no less and not just an add-on, was a shitty move and one leaving a permanent brown stain on the publisher's trousers. Anyway, you're a member of Anyway, you're a member of so-called Hanseatic League, a commercial trading and defensive organization founded to protect members' trading interests in Central and Northern Europe from the late 12th to 15th century. You're a prospering young trader, hoping for amassing riches and creating his own trade empire to eventually become the titular patrician. And who patrician is other than the richest of the rich? I do not know. I'm not even sure that the person existed in real history. Because yeah, Hanseatic League actually did exist. You start with a small ship, hopefully buying low and selling high, increasing your wealth, investing in ports, ships, fleets, and even eventually involving yourself in politics. If you're a fan of games that let you lead your own company, Patrician 3 is a blast and you should definitely try it out. But if you're someone who's offended by terrible business practices publishers involved themselves in with the game, then you should also give it a chance. It's been years, no one cares anymore how it came to be, and neither do I really. I only complained about it for the sake of posterity so that we would not repeat the same mistakes twice. I'm not the best person to talk about RTSs as there were only a few that I genuinely enjoyed. It's not the genre, it's me, I'm just not cut out to play these. I was never very good at them and I don't think that it will ever change. So whenever I have to cover one, and especially one with which I've only superficial experience, I feel a tad uneasy. Keep all of that in mind. Army Men RTS has the most obvious title I've heard, but also one that fits what it is perfectly. It's a real-time strategy in which you control an army of green toy soldiers against the opposing tan-colored one across a variety of battlefields in a 15 missions long campaign. The fact that all the units are toys changes nothing, as the traditional for the genre trifecta of resource gathering, structures and units building and combat are present in Army Men RTS and realized in a stylized in the game's toy theme perfectly. So, since most of the game takes place in and around the house, you collect plastic bits from random objects such as frisbees, dog balls and abandoned toys, and electricity from batteries, toasters and walkie-talkies to name a few, and these are your resources for units and buildings. Each type of unit looks and behaves differently, and they all have their own weak and strong sides and best use case scenarios too. Learning when to spend more on a costly unit and when to invest in numerous weaker ones may be the key to success, and since both sides have access to identical soldiers and buildings, it's just a sound strategy and knowledge of your troops that can give you any kind of an advantage in Army Men RTS. Well, power-ups can change the tide of the battle too, but since they have to be found, I consider them more as bonuses rather than something you can count on. The story behind this strategy is not great, but it's also not important, as it's the tactical depth that's what's most fun about Army Men RTS. But for the sake of giving you a complete overview of the game, I'll summarize it quickly anyway. Evil Green Army Colonel Blintz has painted himself and his supporting troops tan, took control of a suburban house, and now leads it with an iron fist. Well, with a plastic one really, but made out of that hard and not soft plastic, so you know, the one that those darn Lego bricks you step on at night are made out of. Now you, working for the Greens, have to free the house and bring back peace to the yard. Now wasn't 2002 a sweet year? So many awesome games. Were your faves in the video or did I somehow skip them? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. For me this is all, so take care of yourself and I'll see you soon.